I still remember the day I discovered the power of gratitude, not just because it changed my outlook on life but because it unveiled a side of existence that I never knew could coexist with our mundane reality. It all started rather benignly, on a Tuesday like any other, amidst the gray backdrop of a small town tucked away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The morning was uneventful. I made my usual coffee, scrolled through social media, and let the lingering sense of breakfast float around my tiny kitchen. But something felt off that day, a quiet unease that settled in my chest. I was working a dead-end job that barely paid my bills, my relationships felt strained, and everything seemed to blur into a repetitive cycle. After another long day at work, I fell into bed, staring at my ceiling, wondering if life was meant to feel this uninspiring. Then, I had a dream that shook me awake, one that would drive my life in a direction I never anticipated. I found myself in a vast, dark forest, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to stretch into an unfathomable sky. The air crackled with an energy I couldn't explain, and deep within the woods, I saw a shimmering light. Driven by a force beyond my comprehension, I moved toward it. The light grew brighter, pulsating, alive. As I stepped closer, it revealed itself to be a figure, a woman, ethereal and radiant, standing among the trees. She wore a long, flowing gown that floated like mist around her, and her eyes sparkled like stars. "Thank you," she whispered, the words echoing as if the very forest was alive with her gratitude. I blinked, bewildered. "Thank you for what?" I managed to stammer. "For being here," she smiled, and suddenly, the ground at my feet was covered in vibrant flowers, blooming in colors I had never seen before. Each petal seemed to pulse with life, each hue brighter than anything imaginable. "Your presence here is important," she continued. "Your thoughts create your reality, and when you embrace gratitude, it can shift the very fabric of your experience." My heart raced as I tried to process this. Gratitude. How could that possibly change anything? "But I have nothing to be grateful for," I protested, an edge creeping into my voice. "My life is a mess." The woman's eyes softened, and she waved her hand, causing the flowers to bloom further, revealing images from my past. Each flower depicted memories, my first bike ride, laughing with friends, the warm hugs from my mother. "Look closer," she urged, "at what you've forgotten." As I gazed down, faces lit up the flowers, moments flooded my mind. It was as if I had been blind to the beauty that was woven into my life's fabric. "When you nurture gratitude, you cultivate awareness," she said. "What you focus on grows. Do not allow the darkness to blind you from the light." The world around me shifted again, the flowers turned into vibrant butterflies that danced around me in a mystical display. But suddenly, blackness began, creeping at the edges of my vision, a chill running down my spine with each passing second. I sensed something lurking in the shadows, the atmosphere shifting from vibrant joy to sinister dread. "Embrace it or be consumed," the woman warned, her voice tense. Panic surged through me. I willed myself to wake up, but the darkness tightened its grip. I felt the cold sting of fear. "Remember the light," she urged, her tone thick with urgency. "Find gratitude." Just as I felt myself slipping away, I remembered the smallest moments, the warmth of sunlight filtering through the trees, the laughter of friends echoing in the park, my grandmother's comforting smile. I grasped onto those fragments with every ounce of my being, clinging to the light like a lifeline. Suddenly, the darkness receded, and I woke up, gasping for air as if I had been submerged underwater. I was drenched in sweat, heart racing, but I felt different. It was like I was seeing the world anew, colors sharper and sounds clearer. With that jolt came the realization, I needed to change my perspective. I began jotting down things I was grateful for, starting small. A kind stranger holding the door for me, my coworker sharing lunch, the sweet, gentle hum of the coffee machine in the morning. Gradually, those lists filled up, and each gratitude seemed to amplify the mundane until it became extraordinary. I surprised myself when I realized I felt lighter, as if the burden of my worries melted away one acknowledgement at a time. However, the dream woman's warning echoed in my mind. I felt an unsettling presence, like an ever-watchful shadow lurking in the corners of my happiness. I tried to ignore it, pushing away thoughts that hinted at foreboding. But as the weeks passed, it became harder to dismiss. Instances of doubt and negativity began creeping into my newfound haven, hints of anguish slipping into my peaceful state. Connections with friends became strained once more, and old fears resurfaced, bringing whispers of skepticism. The darkness was insidious, pulling at my grateful heart, attempting to claim me again. Yet, I fought back, leaning deeper into my gratitude practice. When I noticed panic building as bills flew in or job prospects dried up, I cataloged each small blessing instead. I made it a ritual. Even when the weight of despair pressed down on me, I actively sought out moments of light, and slowly but surely, I noticed the shadows retreating. But the tale doesn't end there. One evening, sitting at my kitchen table, weary from the hustle of the day, I heard an unmistakable sound, a knock at my door. It felt eerily familiar, as if the shadows had come to collect their due. My heart raced as I opened the door to reveal a figure I couldn't recognize, a pale silhouette that glimmered under the dusk light. It was the woman from my dream, a spectral echo of that surreal moment. Her eyes glinted with mischief. "You've been radiating light that draws me in," she said, her voice smooth with an unsettling undertone. "But you don't understand, do you? There are consequences." I felt chills creep along my spine. It was like she drew energy from my gratitude, hungry for more. "I'm here to take what's mine," she said ominously. "The balance must be restored." In that moment, I realized it was my choice. My gratitude had attracted something dark and deceptive. I needed to confront this twisted reflection of my journey. "You have no power over me," I said, my voice steadier than my quaking heart. "I choose to embrace gratitude, even when challenged by darkness." As those words left my lips, the air vibrated with intensity, almost like a ripple disrupting the calm surface of a pond. Her eyes widened, the shadows swirling around her receding as I allowed my gratitude to pulse fiercely from within. A blinding light erupted around me, staving off her ethereal form, illuminating the shadows that had clouded my heart. She screamed, the sound unnervingly shrill, and the darkness dissipated, vanished from my life in a breath of shared warmth. I stood in the silence that followed, the lingering scent of flowers filling my kitchen, a reminder of the beauty I had discovered through every struggle. I quickly slammed the door, locking away the remnants of darkness. That night I penned my gratitude, now clearer and brighter, my journal a testament of resilience, filled with small victories and larger joys. While I still occasionally felt the faint ticks of doubt and despair, they no longer had the same hold over me. The power of gratitude was palpable, but I knew that maintaining that light required vigilance. I had discovered that gratitude wasn't just a fleeting feeling or a trick of the mind, it was an active choice, a lifeline against the shadows of despair racing toward me. And as I lay in bed that night, the weight of the world lifted, I finally understood the truth. The light within is powerful, but it's a candle you must choose to hold up, even against the dark. The day I discovered the power of gratitude was only just the beginning. I've never considered myself the type of person who would attract attention. In fact, I've spent most of my life trying to remain in the shadows, blending into the background at school and work, mumbling my responses when prompted and avoiding eye contact at all costs. So, you can imagine my surprise when, one night, my life took a bizarre twist that flipped my existence upside down, thrusting me into the spotlight in the most unsettling way possible. It all started during an ordinary Thursday evening. I had just returned to my cramped little apartment after another monotonous day of work, plopping down on my couch with the intention of melting my brain in front of the TV. As I mindlessly flipped through channels, something unusual caught my eye. There was a live feed displaying a silhouette of a person against a flickering screen, their face obscured by shadows. Intrigued, I leaned closer, and my heart raced when I realized it was a group of people gathered in an unknown dimly lit location engaging in some kind of ritual. Snippets of their conversation filled the room. They spoke of spirits and otherworldly entities, invoking the name the Watcher. It sent a chill down my spine. Feeling an odd mix of curiosity and dread, I continued to watch, fixated by their frenzied energy. Then I noticed something that made my breath catch in my throat. One of the participants pointed at the camera, eyes wide in terror as he shouted, "It chooses." My skin prickled, and I remember thinking it was some kind of prank. It felt too unreal, too staged. But then, to my horror, the camera panned to reveal a flickering image of me on the screen. I could see myself in my living room, horrified, eyes wide as I stared back at the camera. How was this possible? My heart raced. Sweat trickled down my back as the realization hit me. Somehow, they had breached my privacy. Suddenly, their chanting intensified, and it felt as if the air grew thicker, heavy with an unknown pressure. I darted to my window, frantically closing the curtains, praying that I wouldn't look out and see someone standing there. The thought of someone watching me, all of them screaming my name, created a horrifying knot in my stomach. The feed eventually cut off, leaving me in the dark and silence of my apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted that night. I tossed and turned in bed, sleep eluding me as the weight of that bizarre spectacle pressed down on me. In the days that followed, I became increasingly paranoid. I checked my locks obsessively and avoided going out at night. Each strange sound sent me spiraling, convinced they were coming for me, that the watcher had marked me. My friends noticed my sudden withdrawal, but I brushed them off, insisting it was just stress. I told myself it was all just a strange dream. But then, out of nowhere, a strange package arrived at my door. It was a small, unmarked box, perfectly square. The moment I picked it up, I felt an eerie chill radiate from it. My hands trembled as I unsealed it, finding nothing but a small mirror inside. Unlike any mirror I had seen before, there was a blackness within its frame, almost as if it had no reflection. I felt drawn to it, a voice in the back of my mind compelling me to look deeper. Fearing what I might find, I spent days avoiding it, burying it under a pile of old clothes. But each time I walked past it, it seemed to whisper my name, pulling me closer. It was as if that mirror was a portal to something sinister, something that called out to me. I decided to research the Watcher, poring over forum posts and creepy urban legends. Much of what I found terrified me further. Now, I wasn't just paranoid, I was convinced that whatever that group had done was a dark invitation, and I was the unwilling host. Soon after, the messages began. They started as cryptic texts that slipped into my phone, claiming to be gifted watchers. They promised truth and visions about my life but demanded my unwavering attention. I couldn't escape them, they were everywhere, peeking through my email, creeping into my social media feeds. Most were just gibberish, but enough contained eerie, unsettling details about my life that I felt cornered. "I see you," one message read. "You have something we desire." I felt helpless, the tension coiling tighter around my chest each day. Then came the night that changed everything. I was jolted awake by a sudden noise, a sound prickling my skin. In that half-asleep state, I looked around my room, heart thudding. That's when I noticed the mirror standing ominously against the wall, the darkness within it throbbing like a heartbeat. My hand found its way to the surface, and I pressed palm against cold glass. In an instant, my surroundings faded. I was no longer in my apartment, but instead, I stood in what looked like a vast void filled with faces, swirling shadows, and distorted whispers overlapping one another. They were everywhere, closing in, and among them, I spotted the entity, the Watcher, a dark silhouette with endless eyes staring into my soul. As I tried to scream, no words formed. Time stretched, and moments blurred into an eternity until I felt the pressure lift just as suddenly as it had come. I found myself back in my room, gasping for air. The mirror had cracked, a web of fractures splintering across its surface. A chilling realization dawned upon me, they were coming for me. The following week was a whirlwind of chaos. I packed a bag, convinced that I needed to leave, disappear, but every attempt to escape felt futile. Messages flooded my phone, and faces seemed to peer at me from every corner. I was never alone. Every step I took felt like a performance, with an audience hidden in the shadows, watching my every move. In a final act of desperation, I connected with an online group that specialized in paranormal investigations, hoping to dispel what had fallen upon me. After sharing my unsettling story, several members expressed interest in coming to my apartment, urging me to confront the Watcher with them. A part of me desperately craved help, but the other part feared what they might unleash. Despite my warnings, they arrived the following weekend, armed with cameras, ghost hunting devices, and an eagerness that unsettled me. I entered my apartment, anxiety bubbling in my gut, as they began their investigation. Hours passed, full of ritual and chanting, aimed at breaking whatever hold it had on me. But soon, the mirth dissolved into tension. One investigator stumbled upon the cracked mirror, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. "This is it," he exclaimed, lifting the broken mirror to his face. An unsettling silence filled the room, the air shifted, vibrating with an electric energy. Suddenly, the darkness intensified, enveloping the room as the Watcher broke free from the confines of the shattered glass. The manifestation was absolute chaos. Screams erupted as shadows reached for the group members, pulling one by one into the banishment of the void. I watched in horror as my help became prey, dragged into the darkness while I stood paralyzed, helpless. I finally managed to shake free from my paralysis, racing to my bedroom, frantically clawing at that accursed mirror. As the energy erupted in the room, I saw it, a shifting form of dark pleasure within its depths, whispering my name with a throaty laughter that echoed through my bones. I shattered the remaining glass with a frantic kick, and as the shards exploded outward, a blinding light engulfed the room. Silence returned, the dust settling slowly. My apartment was empty now, void of everyone but me. I stood alone, every remnant of their presence eroded away. Somehow, I had broken the spell, freed them but condemned myself. Days turned into weeks, and gradually, I faded back into the life of invisibility I once knew. I rarely spoke of that night, and slowly, the messages stopped. I returned to my old routine, the darkness deemed a memory, but the weight of the last surviving whispers lingered in my mind. That night awakened something within me that refused to be ignored, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still watched, that the darkness had not let me go. It might have taken the others, but I was the center of its attention now. Even now, writing this, I can feel it looming. Remember, the moment you turn your gaze towards the shadows, they'll be waiting with watchful eyes. Watch your mirrors, they may be deeper than they appear. When I tried to mediate a dispute between friends, I didn't expect it to shatter the very foundation of my reality. Let me explain. For years, I watched my friends, Alex and Sarah, build an unshakable bond, one that many would envy. They were inseparable, always sharing laughter, surviving heartbreaks together, and dreaming about the future. But like any relationship, cracks began to form. It started with a simple disagreement over an inside joke, something trivial that should have been resolved over a quick phone call, yet spiraled into a rift that grew wider with each passing day. As weeks turned into months, I found myself caught in the middle, going to one side and then the other, trying to apply the soothing balm of reason. You have to talk it out, I urged them both. Friendship is too valuable to crumble over misunderstandings. They seemed to listen, but every time I thought they were closing the gap, something new would come up, and that rift would gurgle back to life. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I arranged a gathering at my place and invited them both under the guise of a game night. I figured a relaxed atmosphere would help them remember what they enjoyed about each other, how friendship can sometimes need a little grease to keep from rusting over. I spent hours preparing snacks, arranging chairs in a circle, and setting up a cheerful ambience that I hoped would encourage connection instead of conflict. As the appointed hour drew near, my heart raced. I wanted so badly to see them laughing together again, their shared joy a testament to the strength of their bond. The doorbell finally rang, and I welcomed Alex, his face a storm cloud shadowed by unease. "Hey, man," he said awkwardly, glancing around as if expecting Sarah to emerge from the shadows. Moments later, Sarah arrived, her eyes cool and collected, but the tension crackling around her felt almost palpable. I tried to break the ice, cracking jokes and hoping to elicit a few smiles, but the atmosphere remained frigid. After a brief round of board games that lasted just long enough to convince them that we were having fun, I could see their patience waning. I called for a break and led them into the living room, where the coffee table bore the remnants of snacks. In that still moment, I summoned all my courage. "We need to talk, the three of us," I said, my voice steady but my heart quickening. They exchanged glances, defensive, hesitant, and recognizing their silent agreement to avoid confrontation. "Why don't we discuss what happened?" I ventured, feeling my palms sweat. "It's time to clear the air." For a moment, silence draped over us, only interrupted by the soft ticking of the wall clock, each tick like a pulse, reminding me that time was running out. And then, something shifted in the air. I didn't notice it at first, but it was as if the room grew dimmer, shadows stretching longer, and then I heard it, a sound, like a whisper carried on a cold draft. A voice I couldn't identify, but it chilled me to the bone. "Stop," it seemed to hiss. I jerked my head toward the windows, expecting to see the streetlights flickering outside. Nothing. I brushed it off as a trick of the mind, too preoccupied with Alex's sudden flare of anger as he threw out accusations and defended his position on the joke that had started their feud. Sarah countered back, her voice rising, and suddenly we were engulfed in a vortex of tension. My attempts to interject fell flat, muffled by their escalating emotions. And then it spoke again, louder, more insistent. "Stop this." I froze, glancing at both of them as they continued, lost in the heat of their argument, oblivious to the presence looming over us. That's when I noticed the shadows, creeping like tendrils across the walls, seeming to pulse with an energy all their own. My heart dropped. I dared not reveal my fear, my instincts screaming at me to end this confrontation, but I had invited them over to find resolution, not fear. And just when I opened my mouth to intervene, a whisper slithered right into my ear, like icy fingers trailing down my skin. "You shouldn't have done this," it warned. Panic seized me, but I couldn't let it show. I had to focus on Alex and Sarah. Just then, Sarah's voice took on an otherworldly resonance, a deep, echoing timbre that made my skin crawl. "You think you can fix this?" She spat, her eyes wide with an intensity I had never seen before. "You think your little game nights can patch everything? You have no idea what's at stake." I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Their forms blurred, flickering as though the very fabric of reality was fraying around us. Shadows began swirling, absorbing the light, and suddenly, the warmth of the room turned to a bone-chilling cold. "Get out," Alex barked, the voice now layered with a different timbre, something sinister brewing beneath his familiar facade. "You have no power here." I stumbled backward, caught between two friends who were no longer recognizable, their faces distorting, contorting into grotesque masks devoid of the love and laughter that had once filled the room. I turned to flee, but something tugged at my leg, a dark mass rising from the floor, wrapping around my ankles, constricting like a vice. "You wanted to meddle," it hissed, echoing the voices of my friends. "Now you will pay the price." I fought against the dark tendrils wrapping tighter, dragging me down, and the last thing I saw was Sarah's face, twisting into a snarl, her eyes glowing, an abyss where warmth used to be. I awoke hours later in my living room, the game night set up all but a memory. The shadows were gone, the atmosphere returned to a mundane reality, but my heart thudded against my ribs in a rhythm of dread. I picked up my phone, hoping to reach out to Alex and Sarah, but I noticed their numbers were gone. Deleted. Panic coursed through me like ice water, my fingers trembled as I scrolled through messages, memories of countless nights shared, but they had all vanished. They were wiped from existence, as if they had never been. I ran out of my apartment, fear propelling me forward into the dimly lit streets, searching, hoping to find a familiar face. I knocked on doors, asking neighbors if they knew where Alex and Sarah lived, but their faces twisted with confusion, they had never heard of them. I fumbled through memories, piecing together fragments, but it was akin to chasing shadows. Hours turned to days, and I found myself grappling with an empty space where friendship once thrived. The laughter, the shared wisdom, the inside jokes, all obliterated by a dispute I never intended to provoke. Something beyond my understanding had taken them, and I was left to bear the burden of my mediating mistake. Now I wander aimlessly, seeking answers in whispers of the dark, dreading the day when I will be pulled into the void that consumed everything I held dear. So heed my warning if you ever find yourself trying to mediate a dispute between friends. Sometimes, the shadows listening behind you are waiting for an invitation. They are all too eager to rip apart the bonds you cherish, to take what you love and twist it into something unrecognizable. Remember, not all disputes should be meddled in, sometimes the cost is far too high. I've thought long and hard about how to share this with anyone. I don't know if it'll lead to some sort of validation or just further isolation, but here goes nothing. I can't believe I'm even writing this. People often say how a single moment can change your life forever. I never really understood that until the summer I turned 23. I was aimlessly wandering through a dilapidated thrift store on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that smelled like rotten wood and stale air. I remember getting lost in the aisles, endlessly browsing old clothes and books, trying to find something unique. That's when I found it, a dusty, leather-bound journal wedged between two cracked encyclopedias. The moment I picked it up, I felt this strange energy radiating from it, as if it were alive. The cover had no title, just an intricate design of swirling vines and impossibly detailed symbols. I flipped through the pages, only to discover they were all blank. It didn't seem special at first, but something pulled me to it, a whisper in the back of my head telling me to take it home. So, I did. That night, I settled down at my rickety kitchen table with the journal in hand, the soft glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the walls. As I picked up a pen and pressed it to the first page, I felt a rush of anticipation, like I was about to unlock some long-buried secret. I wrote the date, then a simple phrase, what if I could visit any moment in time? The second I finished writing, I felt the room shift. The air grew thick, and a sensation like cold wind rushed around me, tightening and tugging at my clothes. I looked around, confused, but nothing seemed different. Just as I was about to brush it off as a weird coincidence, a blinding light engulfed me, and the world around me warped into something unrecognizable. One moment, I was in my kitchen; the next, I was standing in the middle of a bustling market square, the vibrant colors and sounds overwhelming my senses. It felt real, so real it was like stepping into a painting. The scent of spices and fresh bread filled the air, drawing me forward. Before I even had a chance to think, I start walking, curiosity propelling me through the crowd. I spent what felt like hours wandering, vendors selling wares, children laughing, musicians playing joyful tunes. Everything was bright, alive, and enchanting. After a time, I saw a man sitting under a large tree, sketching furiously in a notebook. Something about him caught my eye, and the instinct to approach him was undeniable. As I got closer, I could see he was capturing the life around him, each stroke precise and thoughtful. "Incredible, isn't it?" he said, looking up and meeting my gaze. His voice held a warmth to it, and I felt an inexplicable connection. For the next few moments, we talked, and I learned his name was Elias. He spoke with passion about art, dreams, and life, things that had been suffocating in my chest for years. I found myself sharing more and more with him. Eventually, I told him my secret about the journal and how I had found myself here, in this time, in this place. He stared at me for a long moment before breaking into a knowing smile. "Time is just a river, my friend," he said, "and we are all mere travelers." His words struck me like lightning. There was something almost magical about him, a wisdom that I desperately craved. Before I knew it, I was leaning in closely, just soaking in everything he had to say, and for several days, I would return to the market square just to sit with him, learning, exploring new thoughts, and sharing my fears. But soon enough, I noticed something unsettling. People began to look at me differently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion. One day while walking past the vendors, I heard whispers about the strange one and the lost soul. My heart dropped as paranoia sunk in, and that feeling of connection to Elias began to blur. When I finally confronted him about it, he smiled, but there was a darkness in his gaze. "You must understand, some moments are not meant to be visited. They have their own purpose." I wanted to argue, to retort that I had every right to be there, but I could feel a heaviness building in the air. A chill crept down my spine as he continued, "If you stay too long, you might lose yourself entirely." Those words echoed in my mind like a haunting refrain, but the pull of this extraordinary life held me captive. I couldn't just leave, could I? The journal had given me this wondrous chance to experience life in a new light, and every fiber of my being screamed to hold on to it. So, instead of retreating, I dug deeper. As days morphed into weeks, I started experimenting with the journal, writing down various phrases, thoughts, and wishes, each time willing myself to go further. I danced through ages, skipping from one moment to another, tasting and feeling experiences that were never mine, ancient wars, artistic revolutions, even mundane moments of love and loss. But every time I returned to Elias, I could feel time reshaping around us, bending under my will. From the joy radiating from his laughter to the way his eyes glazed over with worry as I shared my growing obsession, I was leaving a mark on this world, and not all of it was good. The whispers grew into full-blown murmurs, shadowing my presence like vultures, making my heart race with unease. One evening, I returned to the market square and found Elias waiting alone, his expression unreadable. "You need to stop," he warned, "before it's too late. You're changing things in ways you can't understand." I shook my head, feeling anger bubble under my skin. "No, this is exhilarating. I can be whoever I want here." His eyes darkened. "That's exactly the problem." I felt a sudden jolt, as though the ground beneath me shifted, and then he vanished. I was alone in the crowd, but the joyful chatter had turned into unsettling whispers, eyes watching me from every corner. I could feel their stares, their judgment, and slowly panic set in. I realized I had stepped too far, too often, and the weight of those moments began to crush me. That night, I fumbled for the journal under the dim light in my room, flipping through the blank pages, desperate to find a solution. I started frantically writing, each word a plea to fix what felt irreparably broken between me and this new world. But as I filled the pages, desperation gnawed at me. The more I wrote, the more distorted reality became. My vision blurred, and I felt myself spiraling down this endless pit, losing my grasp on time itself. The last thing I remember was the sensation of falling, like gravity had suddenly ceased to exist, and then I blinked, waking up in my kitchen, back in the present. Heart racing, I felt disoriented, as if I had just awakened from a fever dream. But something wasn't right. The journal lay open on the table, the pages flipping wildly as though someone were flipping through them. I reached out hesitantly, but the moment I touched it, everything started to fade away. I thought I was going to lose consciousness again. After a few tortured breaths, I found myself in a new reality. My apartment was the same but different, as though the air was tinged with a heavy sorrow. I looked around, but something vital felt missing. My phone buzzed, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "We miss you," it read, "come back." Time had shifted again, but this time I realized I had left something behind, too many moments altered, too many lives touched. The faces of the people I encountered were etched in my mind, but I had lost them. I could never return. My hands trembled as I closed the journal, the weight of my adventure sitting like a leaden stone in my gut. I had chased thrills, ignoring the danger lurking beneath that intoxicating freedom, and the cost of that adventure was my past. I never wrote in that journal again, but sometimes, in quiet moments, I sense a pull, a calling to adventure once more. A whisper reminding me that time, with all its grace and mystery, should never be trifled with. And maybe that's why, even now, as I share this with you, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. There's a darkness lurking just beyond the surface, an echo of shadows that ripple through time. And to anyone reading this, remember, be careful what adventures you embark on. Some can lead you to places from which you may never return. Because the time I went on an adventure that changed my life has left me in a reality I never wanted, separated from a world I can never touch again. It was a bleak Tuesday morning, the kind where the sky looks perpetually overcast and the world feels heavy with unspoken sadness. I had just lost my job after months of feeling the noose of dread tighten around me, and my savings were dwindling. I stepped outside to my beat-up old hatchback, the faint outline of rain already dripping from the eaves above. As I wiped down the windshield, I caught sight of an elderly man sitting on a nearby bench. He was unkempt, his clothes looking like they belonged to a different era, and he wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes. I felt a pang of empathy for him, knowing the struggling connotation attached to that aged figure, but I had my own burdens to carry. I climbed inside my car and turned the key, a feeble sputter echoing from under the hood before silence engulfed me. Great! Just what I needed on a day like today. I slammed the steering wheel and sunk my face into my palms, feeling hopeless and utterly defeated. But then, a strange inclination struck me. I exited the car, my heart pounding against my chest as I approached the man on the bench. "Hey there," I managed to say, feeling incredibly awkward. He looked up, his eyes gleaming like dull marbles, and nodded. "Hello, young one." He had a thick accent, maybe Irish, which added a strange warmth to the otherwise dismal field of my mind. "Do you mind if I join you?" I asked hesitantly. "Not at all, a kind heart is always welcome," he replied, a warm smile cracking the somberness of his face. His teeth were stained and uneven, but his gentle aura was infectious. For the next few minutes, we exchanged mundane small talk, and I learned that his name was Walter. He once had a family but spoke of them in past tense, and I felt a twinge of sorrow. As we talked, the world around us faded. For those moments, I forgot my worries. I even smiled, a genuine one. But then, it was time to go. "It was really nice talking to you, Walter," I said, glancing over at the dreary clouds. "Thank you for your kindness," he replied. His smile was wide, and somehow, I felt lighter. But as I turned to leave, I don't know why I did it, but I reached into my pocket and pulled out my last $10 bill. "Here, take this." His brows knitted together in surprise, but I insisted. "I insist." He reached out, hesitatingly accepting the crumpled bill. "Thank you, young one." I got back into my car and drove away, and although my spirits felt a bit lifted, the weight of my troubles quickly settled back in. That day, the monotony of existence resumed its hold over me. The job market was bleak, and I felt invisible. I returned home to my empty apartment, where dust danced in the air, and the silence swallowed me whole. But then, something unexpected happened. That evening, I received a phone call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered, thinking it was just another spam call. To my shock, it was a recruiter. They had seen my resume online and wanted to interview me for a position next week, one that offered decent pay and benefits. I could hardly believe my luck. The next week, I prepped for the interview, and during that time, I couldn't shake the memory of Walter. I felt a strange warmth every time I thought about our encounter, as if my simple act of kindness had propelled me into some serendipitous loop. When interview day came, I walked in with newfound confidence, thanks in no small part to Walter. The interview went better than I could have imagined, and at the end, the hiring manager shook my hand and said, "When can you start?" Overwhelmed with joy, I accepted the offer on the spot. My life started to piece itself back together, and for a while, I attributed my luck to that small conversation I had with Walter. I wanted to thank him, but I had no idea where to find him. However, the first paycheck came faster than expected, and I made a promise to myself I would find Walter again and pass the goodwill forward somehow. Days turned into weeks, and I wondered if he was still sitting on that bench beneath the clouds. One cold morning, I returned to the park with a cup of steaming coffee and a good sandwich. But when I reached the bench, there was no one there. I searched the park, asking a couple of people if they had seen an old man in a hat. A woman feeding pigeons just shrugged and said, "I've only seen old Jack sit there." Old Jack? That wasn't the name Walter had given me, so it felt odd, but I pushed through my confusion, and I kept coming back. Slowly, I learned that Walter had been a beloved fixture in this neighborhood, a storyteller and joker. The stories shared at the park about him were enchanting. As time went on, I now shared my good fortune with those at the park, thanks to Walter's influence. Money for coffee, sandwiches for those in need, I wanted to spread the kindness I had received. Weeks later, I got a call again, just another day at work, and they told me they were transferring me to another branch, a role that would offer even more growth. I felt on top of the world. But with the changes happening in my life, my visits to the park dwindled, and after a while, I simply fell into my new routine. Then one fateful evening, I drove home and passed the park. My heart tugged, and I found myself stopping. It was a surreal fall evening, the air crisp and invigorating. As I walked through the park's entrance, I was overtaken by nostalgia for my time talking to Walter, and instinctively, I walked toward that familiar bench. When I arrived, I was shocked to see Walter sitting there, his presence like a spark igniting the cold night. This time, he looked frailer, but the glimmer in his eyes remained. "Walter," I exclaimed, a smile breaking across my face. He looked up, a grin instantly lighting up his face. "You've returned," he said warmly. I rushed forward, unsure of how to begin. "I've been looking for you," I said, almost out of breath. "Do you remember me? I'm the one who gave you." I trailed off, feeling this rush of unbelievable emotion alight in my chest. "I do remember," he said softly. "And I know you've been paying it forward since." I nodded, overwhelmed. We caught up, and I told him everything, that a single act of kindness had catalyzed a change in my life. He listened intently, his eyes shimmering with delight. As the sun set on the horizon, I fished out my wallet and handed him a freshly signed check. "This isn't charity, this is gratitude. Thank you for inspiring me," I said. The old man's eyes glinted with tears, but he shook his head gently. "My boy, it is you who changed your day, and it is now you who shapes the world. Each act you perform echoes through generations, like ripples in a pond." I left him that evening with $100 bill, half of my paycheck. Fear washed away, hope filled its place, and I understood what it truly meant to pay it forward. I visited Walter whenever I could, sharing laughter and stories, learning more about the world, and realizing that kindness, no matter how small, is a gesture that can indeed change lives, sometimes even more than one. Days rolled into months, and Walter's laughter never faded from my mind. That small act of kindness changed more than just my day, it changed my entire life, an eternal lesson echoing like a song, that in giving, we truly receive. I never considered myself a confrontational person. I preferred to keep my head down, do my work, and avoid drama, but everything changed one ordinary Wednesday afternoon at my office job. I was sitting at my desk, typing up a report, when I overheard a hushed conversation from the break room. It was Emily and Tom, two co-workers I thought I knew well. Their voices were low but urgent, like they were discussing something that could shake the walls. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I paused my typing and strained to hear. My heart raced as I caught snippets between their whispers. "He can't find out," said Emily. "We'll both lose everything if he does." Who were they talking about? A million scenarios crashed through my mind, each more bizarre than the last until I finally settled on the most obvious. It must be about our boss, Mr. Jenkins. He had a reputation for being ruthless, but he wasn't the only one in the office with secrets. I stewed in my chair for a few minutes, weighing my options. Should I confront them? Should I ignore it? My gut told me I needed to know more. I snuck into the break room, heart pounding, finding only Emily with her back to me, focused on her phone. I feigned ignorance. "Hey, what's up? You guys sounded intense." Emily jumped, spinning to face me with wide eyes. Nothing. Just, typical office gossip." She shrugged it off, but I could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands trembled. I almost backed off, but the thrill of dirt clawed at my conscience. "Really? Because it sounded like you were worried about something significant." I crossed my arms, hopeful my body language would convey a sense of ease. Tom shuffled in seconds later, looking just as uneasy. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes darting between me and Emily. I raised an eyebrow, ready to pounce. "Just trying to get to the bottom of this, whatever it is you two are worried about." Emily bit her lip, glancing at Tom, who shot her a look filled with silent urgency. I should have walked away. I could have let it be, but instead, I pressed harder. "You two clearly think something's about to go down. Is it about Jenkins?" The silence that followed felt heavy and palpable, like a noose tightening around us. "Look, it's complicated," Emily finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just forget it. For your own good." My heart raced, but something in my gut felt that I was pressing on the right wound. There was something bigger at play here. Before I could respond, Jenkins himself stormed into the room, his presence commanding. "What's happening here?" he barked, eyes narrowed. In that moment, everything shifted. My blood ran cold, and I struggled for a response. I was just, "Get back to work," he thundered, his eyes flaring with rage. Emily's face paled as Tom swallowed hard, and the tension in the room skyrocketed. I stumbled back from the turmoil swirling around me, retreating to my desk. My mind raced. I hadn't gotten the answers I wanted, but I felt the weight of something ominous lurking beneath the surface. I couldn't shake off the feeling that they were entangled in something far darker. Over the next few days, their behavior twisted further into secrecy, constantly glancing over their shoulders, speaking in hushed voices, and jumping at every noise. It was unsettling, like pieces of a puzzle I needed to complete were desperately missing. I decided to follow them one evening as they left the office, heart thudding in my chest. I trailed them discreetly, hoping I wouldn't get caught. I watched them enter a dimly lit bar a few blocks away. For a moment, I debated turning back, the weight of curiosity pulling at me, but a forceful urge pushed me forward. I took a seat at the back, pretending to sip a drink while they engaged in an animated discussion, their voices low and conspiratorial. As I strained to hear what they were saying, I caught snippets here and there. The files were never meant to leave the building. "If they find out about the numbers, we'll lose everything." Those sentences shattered any doubt I had. This was serious. I slipped out quietly, needing time to process the revelation. I spent that night tossing and turning, my mind racing with what I had discovered. I was on the verge of uncovering some kind of scandal. Should I expose them? What would they lose? What would I potentially gain? It was tempting to consider, until honesty began to churn in my gut, slowly turning the knife. Every few hours, a wave of panic washed over me as I envisioned the consequences of bringing this to light. I tried talking myself out of it. Perhaps it was none of my business. Maybe I should just let it go, but the gnawing feeling persisted. Finally, I succumbed to my instincts as I made a plan to confront Emily the next day when we were working late again. The afternoon dragged, and I felt the pressure mounting within me, muscles tense and thoughts chaotic as I prepared for what I knew had to happen. When the clock hit 6, I caught Emily alone in the break room, filling her mug with coffee. Time slowed down as I gathered my courage. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. She looked at me, eyes wide with suspicion. "About what?" "About Tom, about Jenkins, about whatever you two are hiding." She put her coffee down, glancing around as if fearing someone would overhear. "This isn't the place," she began, but I interrupted her. "No, listen, I can't ignore this. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than just you two, and if it's as dangerous as it sounds." It felt like a dam had broken. Fear flashed in her eyes as she shook her head. "You don't know what you're getting into. You need to walk away. Please." But her plea only made me want to push harder, to find out exactly what they were so afraid of. "I can't do that. I want the truth." For a moment, we stood in silence. The flickering fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like a warning bell, and the air felt charged with unspoken knowledge. "Here we go," she murmured, her shoulders slumping as she braced herself. "All right. But you need to promise you won't tell anyone, at least not until you understand." I nodded, adrenaline surging as I prepared to hear what could turn my world upside down. Emily took a deep breath, eyes darting to the door once more. "Tom and we've been stealing data from Jenkins's clients to sell on the dark web. It started with just a couple of files. We never thought it would escalate like this." I felt every word hit me like a punch, ripping through the protective armor I had convinced myself I wore. My stomach went queasy. "This is..." I trailed off, unable to form a coherent thought. "Why would you do that?" "Money. Pressure. The usual corrupt business reasons. But it's spiraling out of control, and now we're being tracked. If Jenkins finds out, we're done for." A chill ran down my spine. I had stumbled into something horrific, something real that could destroy lives. "So you're not only jeopardizing your jobs, but potentially involving all of us," I began, feeling bile at the back of my throat. "You don't understand. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this, but I'm scared. We've been made. Jenkins has been watching us, and now that you've seen us whispering, he'll know. If he thinks you're a threat..." Emily looked genuinely terrified. I stumbled back, mind racing. How deep had they gone? What would happen if Jenkins turned his attention toward me? I could feel the walls of my safe little world collapsing around me, but I also felt a surge of determination. "I have to go to Jenkins," I declared, shaking my head at her attempt to dissuade me. "This isn't just about you two anymore. It's about what might happen to everyone else if this continues." Emily's eyes widened. "You can't." In that moment, I realized I had stepped into a web of deceit too intricate for me to weave my way out. But I was already too far in to walk away. I rushed out of the break room, heart pounding as I made my way to Jenkins's office. Dread bubbled in me like a volcano ready to erupt. I had become a pawn in a game far larger than myself, yet I felt I had to play my hand. I knocked on his door and pushed it open. "Mr. Jenkins, I need to talk to you. It's serious." His expression was clouded with irritation as he looked up from his screen. "What is it?" "I'm busy." Those words echoed ominously, and I felt the weight of my decision crashing over me. "I've overheard something that could affect the company. I think you need to know about Tom and Emily." The cruel smile that crept across his face chilled my bones. "I like that you're trying to be a good employee. But trust me, you have no idea what you're getting into." I felt like I had walked into a trap, heart racing as the essence of fear sank deeper into me. "They're stealing information," I blurted out. "Selling it. It's dangerous." Jenkins leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers in contemplation. "And how would you know this, exactly?" Panic surged in me as I realized I had no safeguard. I overheard them talking. You have to believe me." His laughter rang through the apocalyptic silence, a cold sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You think I haven't known? I let them play their little game while I kept tabs. Now I have you to add to the mix. How convenient." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" His sharp smile cut through the air. "You're all part of this now. Whether you realize it or not, they were never the players. You are." I stumbled back, cold sweat coating my brow. "What can I do?" He leaned forward, eyes glinting with malice. "You'll do exactly as I say. Or else you'll end up like them." The weight of his words bore down on me like a suffocating blanket. I left his office in a daze, the world spinning around me. He'd twisted everything into something insurmountable. I was caught in his web now, and my moment of honesty had turned everything into absolute chaos. Days turned into weeks as I spiraled deeper into this madness. I felt trapped, knowing the secrets but feeling powerless to act. Emily and Tom, once my targets of confrontation, had become part of my growing horror. I barely slept, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then one fateful afternoon, as I typed aimlessly, the office fell silent, an uncanny stillness strung tight as a bowstring. Anxiety crept in like a dark fog, and my heart pounded in my chest. The silence was so heavy that I thought it might suffocate me. Suddenly, the office doors burst open. It was a swarm of dark-suited individuals, their expressions unreadable. Panic ignited like wildfire. They moved through the office with haste, all eyes darting to see what was happening. I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what was happening. "Jenkins," I gasped, recognizing him at the center of the storm, fear painted across his features. He turned, meeting my gaze, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his eyes, a hint of vulnerability amid the chaos. "What's going on?" I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. He glanced at me, then looked away. "I don't know," he rasped, panic creeping into his voice as they pulled him aside. In that moment, I recognized an escape clause in the chaos. Facing my own fear, I slipped into the shadows of the office, avoiding their gaze. Ellie and Tom were sharing a look across the room, their hardened expressions dissolving into something soft and unreadable. I could feel the fear thickening around me, melding with dread, until it hit me like a truck. This was the curse of honesty that had ensnared us all. A truth laid bare but riddled with pain, and the gravity of it all had pulled us close to ruin. Later that night, as the cacophony of whispers shrouded me, cloaked in darkness, I reflected on what I had learned. The lesson etched itself into my bones: some truths weave a web too tangled for a single person to unravel. I wished I had kept my mouth shut, opting for the comforting silence that had once lulled me. I had confronted what I thought needed addressing, but the reckoning had reached far beyond anything I could control. And while I learned the price of honesty that day, I also learned that sometimes, words can be a double-edged sword, cutting through the air before they cut through your life. Thus, I realized the only way to survive was to lay low, to preserve the lives that remained unscathed, and hope the tides would eventually calm. It was a lesson in honesty, but at a cost I couldn't afford to bear. I never thought I would find myself stuck in a rut, but here I am, typing this in the quiet of my dimly lit room at 3 a.m., and all I can think about is the moment I realized that everything I had was, well, too comfortable. It started innocently enough: mornings melted into afternoons, which blended effortlessly into evenings. I had a steady job at a local library, my friends were all within a stone's throw, and I had developed a routine that felt as cozy as my favorite placemat. But buried under my blissful ignorance was this niggling sensation that something was missing, a voice that whispered to me that life was slipping through my fingers, and each moment was just a little too familiar, a little too safe. The change was subtle at first. I noticed it one rainy Tuesday when I decided to take my usual route home, and I bumped into an old classmate of mine, Aaron. He had always been the adventurous type, the one who would organize camping trips and spontaneous road trips with friends. I remember looking at him, all windswept hair and a spark in his eyes, and thinking how alive he looked, while I felt like a faded photograph. We exchanged pleasantries, and he invited me to join him on a hiking trip that weekend, something I usually would have laughed off, preferring the familiarity of my couch and Netflix. But something inside me cracked, and I agreed before I even had a chance to think about it. Fast forward to Saturday, and as I strapped on my boots, I felt a swirl of anxiety in my stomach. I had never really hiked before, not beyond the local trails at least, and I was about to plunge into the unknown with a group of strangers. That was the first sign I was pushing myself, and despite my nerves, I also felt a rush of excitement. The hike was exhausting, the air crisp, and every step unleashed a feeling I hadn't felt in years: freedom. We trekked through towering trees that whispered ancient secrets, climbed over rocks, and balanced on narrow trails slicing through cliffs that plunged into vast valleys below. I even found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like forever. There was a moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, that I stood at the peak of a mountain overlooking a breathtaking view. A thought struck me hard, that this was the kind of moment I had been craving, the kind of disruption to my monotonous life that I desperately needed. It was there, amidst the camaraderie of my fellow hikers and the awe of nature, that I made a promise to myself. No more stale evenings spent lifeless in front of the screen, no more night after night of bland comfort. I would embrace change, step outside this box I had built around myself, and be bold again. On the way back down, the air felt electric with possibilities. Aaron and the others offered more trips: whitewater rafting, rock climbing, a road trip across the country. I signed up for them all, feeling liberated as I said yes to things that scared me. But remember how I said change can be unsettling? Well, as thrilling as the next few months became, I couldn't shake off this persistent itch, as if my transformation had awoken something in me that was now restless. At first, I felt like an adventurer in my own life, but then as the weeks passed, with new opportunities coming at me like an avalanche, I found the boundaries of my comfort zone shifting ever so slightly. I craved more excitement. Dreams of travel to distant places lingered in my thoughts, kindling a blossoming wanderlust, but each trip brought with it an overwhelming wave of fear and doubt. What if I failed? What if these new friends evaporated, leaving me to face solitude again? But despite these nagging fears, I persisted. I chose to channel that uncertainty instead of letting it defeat me. As I continued to push my boundaries, something strange began to happen. I started experiencing vivid dreams, dreams that felt tangibly real. In one, I was plummeting from the sky, no parachute in sight, the ground rushing up to meet me. In another, I was trapped in a maze made of mirrors, each reflection showing not just my current self but various versions of who I could become. Each night became an untamed swirl of emotions. As I slept, I realized my subconscious was desperately trying to claw its way out of the box I had fashioned for myself. Soon, things took an unsettling turn. One evening, returned from a challenging rock climbing session, I was struck by an overwhelming urge to wander aimlessly through the woods near my house. Frantic energy pulsed through me as I plunged into the trees, navigating my way further and further into the dense wilderness. But nighttime brought a spooky silence. Shadows cast by the moon made every rustling leaf feel threatening. I should have turned back, retreated to the safety of my home, but I pushed ahead, battling my racing heart as I traversed the unknown. Moments later, I stumbled into a clearing that felt almost surreal, a massive stone archway ancient and covered in moss, with a clear, shimmering pool beneath. The air vibrated strangely, and I felt that familiar chill run down my spine. Against my better judgment, I stepped through the archway, fully aware of the risk I took. As I passed through, everything warped around me, colors blending and swirling until I felt as if I was pulled through a vortex. Suddenly, I was standing on the same mountainside I had been on so many weeks back, but everything was twisted and wrong. The trees were skeletal, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and the vibrant sky was replaced by oppressive clouds that loomed overhead, threatening to descend upon me. Panic gripped me. I was alone in a desolate world, swallowed by a dread that was suffocating and all-consuming. The friends who had felt so uplifting were nowhere in sight. I instinctively glanced over my shoulder expecting to see Aaron or anyone else, but the silence was deafening. The thrill of adventure had morphed into terror, and I realized in that moment that without grounding connections, my reckless pursuit of excitement had led me into darkness. My heart raced as I sprinted back toward the archway, praying it would still be there, praying that I could slip back into the comfort I had craved to escape. But as I turned, desperation clawed at me as I found nothing but the empty expanse of the spectral landscape. I could hear whispers in the wind, soft murmurs that beckoned me deeper into the haunting region. It was almost seductive, a creeping sense that perhaps what I had sought outside of myself could also be here. I had brushed up against the possible perils of seeking excitement without balance, and now, I was trapped in the dark shadow of my own recklessness. Days blended with nights, and all I could feel was an urgency to escape. While back in reality, I had learned to embrace discomfort. This twisted version of my world mirrored my fears, suggesting that pushing beyond limits without introspection could lead to a path that should never be tread. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I collapsed near the archway's site, tears streaming down my face, a psychological and physical exhaustion that rattled my core. I felt the tears cleanse me, and in that moment, I understood that I had to let go of the thrill that could consume me whole. I had to balance this hunger for adventure with the roots and connections that held me grounded. Then, just as I felt I might fade into despair, a warm glow flickered before me. It was the archway, towering above, its presence offering a way back. Without a second thought, I stumbled towards it and passed through. The familiar landscape of the woods welcomed me, the moon shimmering down as if congratulating me for the choice to return, and suddenly, I was back to standing safe on the outskirts of my town. Gone was the fear, what remained was a clear understanding of who I was and the journey I needed to traverse. It felt as though a chamber of my heart had opened, letting go of the reckless need for continuous novelty while cherishing the connections and roots I had nearly severed. I returned to my home that night and embraced the silence, the comfort no longer suffocating but a soothing presence guiding my spirit. Change, I realized, was not merely about adventure and excitement but about balance, introspection, and recognizing the beauty in stillness. I learned to weave adventure into my life with purpose, embracing both the familiar and the unknown, rooted in the people and communities I cherished. Maybe our greatest transformation doesn't always come from chasing thrills but knowing when to slow down and letting the right opportunities into our lives. And now, dear readers, as I finish typing this at 3 a.m., I challenge you to think, are you truly living, or are you simply existing within the confines of your own comfort zone? The choice is yours, but heed my warning, be careful with change, it has a way of leading you to the unforeseen, and sometimes, it's the journey back that holds the most valuable lessons. How a random act of kindness changed my outlook on life. It had been one of those weeks that felt like it would never end, a week where every small inconvenience compounded into something bigger, heavier, and harder to shake. My car battery died on Monday, making me late for work, and by the time Friday rolled around, I was facing the very real prospect of having to dip into my savings to cover unexpected repairs. My boss wasn't thrilled with my tardiness, and the tension at work only added to the suffocating weight of everything else. By the time I left the office that evening, I felt like a rubber band stretched too tightly, ready to snap. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, dragging my feet as I wandered the aisles, barely paying attention to what I was throwing into my cart. My thoughts were a swirling mess of frustration and exhaustion, so much so that I almost didn't notice the woman struggling with her shopping bags near the entrance as I walked out. She was older, probably in her late 70s, with white hair tucked into a bun and a frail frame that looked like it shouldn't be carrying half the load she was attempting to juggle. One of her bags had already split, its contents spilling across the sidewalk, a couple of apples, a loaf of bread, and a jar of peanut butter rolling into the gutter. People walked by without stopping, some glancing at her with mild sympathy before continuing on their way, as if acknowledging her struggle would somehow burden them with the responsibility of helping. I almost kept walking too. Almost. But something in her expression, a mixture of embarrassment and quiet desperation, made me pause. I sighed, already feeling the weight of my own problems pressing down on me, but I couldn't ignore her. I knelt to gather the scattered groceries, scooping up the jar of peanut butter and placing it back into one of her remaining bags. "Let me help you," I said, standing to meet her eyes. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't expected anyone to stop. "Oh, thank you, dear," she said, her voice soft but warm. "I'm afraid these old arms aren't what they used to be." I offered to carry her bags to her car, but she hesitated, glancing down the street. "I don't have a car," she admitted after a moment. "I walked to the bus stop, it's not far." It wasn't far, but the weight of the bags made the distance seem longer than it was. Without thinking, I offered to drive her home. She hesitated again, studying me with a cautious smile, but eventually nodded. "That's very kind of you," she said, and I could see the relief in her eyes. We loaded the bags into my trunk, and as we drove, she told me her name was Margaret. She lived alone in a small apartment on the other side of town, and the bus was her only way to get around. Her husband had passed away years ago, and with no children to help her, she managed as best she could on her own. She spoke with a quiet dignity that made me feel both humbled and ashamed forever, considering walking past her. When we reached her apartment building, I insisted on carrying the bags to her door. It was a modest place, clean but worn, with walls that told stories of years gone by. Margaret invited me in for a cup of tea as thanks, and though I initially planned to decline, something made me say yes. Her apartment was cozy, filled with old photographs and knickknacks that hinted at a life full of memories. She poured 2 cups of tea and set out a plate of shortbread cookies, and we sat at her small kitchen table, talking as if we'd known each other for years. She told me about her late husband, how they'd met at a dance hall in the 1950s and fallen in love over shared laughter and stolen glances. She spoke of their travels, the places they'd seen, and the life they'd built together before he passed. I found myself sharing pieces of my own life too, my struggles at work, the stress of trying to stay afloat in a world that often felt overwhelming. Margaret listened with an attentiveness that felt rare and genuine, offering words of wisdom that somehow cut through the fog of my frustrations. Life has a way of throwing challenges at us, she said, her hands cradling her teacup. But it's not the challenges that define us, it's how we choose to face them. Her words stayed with me long after I left that evening. As I drove home, I realized that helping her, that small act of kindness, had done something I hadn't expected. It had shifted my perspective. For so long, I'd been so consumed by my own problems that I hadn't stopped to consider the world around me, the people who might be carrying burdens far heavier than my own. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I decided to pay that kindness forward, volunteering at a local shelter that weekend and finding a renewed sense of purpose in helping others. It wasn't about grand gestures or monumental changes, it was about the little things, the small acts of humanity that remind us we're all connected. Margaret and I stayed in touch after that day, exchanging phone calls and occasional visits. She became a friend, a confidant, and a source of quiet strength in my life. And though our meeting had been born of chance, it was a reminder that even the smallest moments can have the biggest impact. That one random act of kindness didn't just change Margaret's day, it changed my outlook on life. It reminded me of the power we all have to make a difference, no matter how small, and how those ripples can spread further than we ever imagine. When I was a kid, I always brushed off the little things. I was obsessed with the idea that life would get better when I became an adult. My parents would point out the beauty in small moments, an autumn leaf pirouetting to the ground, the gentle hum of bees buzzing around the flowers in our garden, but I just rolled my eyes, thinking they were wasting their time focusing on trivialities. I wanted adventure, drama, something gigantic that would fill my life with excitement. Little did I know that it wouldn't be grand events that would change my perception, it would be a seemingly innocuous moment in my mundane adulthood that would force me to appreciate the things I had previously overlooked. It started on an ordinary Friday. I was heading home from work, lost in thought, my mind elsewhere as I shoved my hands in my pockets, feeling the chill of the approaching winter. That's when I saw him. A younger man, perhaps in his late 20s, sitting alone on a park bench. He was wearing a tattered red jacket, the kind that screamed of countless cold nights, and beside him sat a battered guitar case, its zipper half-closed. He wasn't playing, instead, he was looking down, his fingers idly tracing patterns on the fabric of his coat. I felt a pang of sympathy but was disappointed by the fact that I hadn't seen him before. In my hurry to get home, I started walking past him, but something made me pause, a faint sound echoing from the guitar case. Curious, I stepped closer, trying to decipher the notes that seemed to dance through the air. I could see the man's lips moving, not singing but mumbling the lyrics of a song I recognized, a song that had always stirred something inside me. I grinned, appreciating the connection that music forged between strangers. I gathered the courage to approach him and asked if he was going to play. He looked up, his eyes sunken yet brightened by a hint of enthusiasm. "I don't know if anyone will listen," he said, though his voice held a spark of hope. I nodded, assuring him I'd love to hear him play. With a slow smile, he opened the case, revealing the guitar, more worn than I expected but somehow majestic. He strummed a few notes before launching into the song, his voice raw but filled with an emotional depth that resonated in my bones. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me. It was one of those moments where time froze. The flurry of my work week faded away, and I was transported to a tranquil world where nothing else mattered. I became acutely aware of the little things around me, the rustling leaves, how the cool breeze felt against my face, the laughter of children playing nearby. When he finished, I felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the performance but for the encounter itself. I thanked him, and to my surprise, he responded with a gentle smile that lit up his face. We talked for a bit, sharing stories about life, our dreams, and our struggles. It turned out he was a musician living on the streets, trying to make sense of his life through music. He spoke about the joy of creating and the pain of not being heard. I offered him a few dollars I had in my pocket, but he waved it away, insisting that the connection was more precious than money. I promised to return and listen some more. For weeks, I went back every Friday, sometimes bringing a friend or two. With each new song, the man seemed to regain a bit of his spark. I could see his confidence grow as more people stopped to listen. Eventually, people began to recognize him, and his little corner of the park morphed into a gathering place for music lovers. One day, while watching him perform, something shifted within me. I realized how these simple moments, the laughter, the music, the warmth of human connection, filled me with a happiness I had never found in my frantic pursuit of adulthood. I saw how focusing on these little things could become a powerful force in our lives. Bit by bit, I started to appreciate my own life more, noting the way the sunrays broke through the clouds, making patterns on the ground, or how a friendly smile exchanged with a stranger could brighten my day. I began to reach out to others in the same way, learning to recognize the struggles and joys within the people around me. It felt like a ripple effect. Talking to that man had opened a floodgate of appreciation that spilled into every facet of my existence. I took extra time to savor my morning coffee, watched the way my cat playfully pounced on her toys, and even began to write about my experiences in a journal. However, everything changed one fateful day when I returned to the park. I arrived and noticed the bench was empty, the guitar case absent. I walked around, my heart sinking. It was the first time since I met him that he wasn't there. Panic surged in me as I asked around, only to find out that he had vanished, leaving behind no trace and no reason. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. I thought of all the moments we'd shared and the beauty he had brought into my life. I wandered the park, contemplating my foolishness for not trying to know him better. Had he needed help? Had he left town? Or worse, had something happened to him? Just when hopelessness began to seep in, I sat on the bench where he normally played. I closed my eyes and listened to the sounds around me, determined to keep the appreciation of small moments alive. Suddenly, I heard music, soft but beautiful. With a surge of hope, I opened my eyes to see another young musician, a stranger with wild hair and a bright smile, strumming a beautiful melody. It struck me, an unbroken chain of connection, a reminder of the little things. With every note, it blossomed into something bigger than any single person. People gathered around this new musician, and I realized I was absorbed in appreciating the moment as it unfolded, this new story in an infinite tapestry of life. And as people began to clap and cheer, I felt my heart swell, knowing that the beauty of seeing the little things in life was still alive. The encounter with the street musician had awakened something deep inside me, a flicker of realization that there would always be music, compassion, and human connection if only I chose to look for them. That day, amidst the kindness and laughter, I learned to embrace life in its entirety, finding meaning in every little thing. This journey of appreciation somehow never truly ends. I never thought much about family traditions, to be honest. Growing up, they always seemed like mere obligations, something to endure rather than cherish. The annual Thanksgiving gathering was my least favorite. My extended family was massive, and every year, I, a socially anxious introvert, was thrust into a teeming room of relatives with whom I had little in common. The endless noise of laughter and chatter felt suffocating. By the time the day was over, I would be an exhausted shell of myself, grateful for Monday to arrive so I could return to the comforting isolation of my room. But what happened last Thanksgiving changed everything. It started like any other year. The leaves had all turned shades of amber and red, the air was crisp, and my mother buzzed around the kitchen, crafting her secret stuffing recipe, while I feigned interest in a football game that I genuinely could not care less about. I had promised myself that this would be a day like any other, merely a time to sip cider and smile through the small talk. But when the guests began to arrive, I noticed something was off, an unnatural tension hung in the air. It wasn't right. Glances were exchanged, hushed whispers followed by laughter that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. My grandmother, usually the centerpiece of our gatherings, was unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on her hands as she kneaded dough for her infamous pumpkin pie. Soon enough, the doorbell rang again, and in walked Aunt Carol, her face pallid and drawn. She stood in the entryway for a moment, eyes darting around the room, searching for what, I didn't know. Then she spotted Grandma. "Mom, can we talk? It's about Dad." That was all it took to deflate the room. The laughter died down as the conversation shifted to a more somber tone. I caught snippets of their discussion, the end being mentioned repeatedly, words like hospital and treatment floated through the room, and my heart sank deeper with every syllable. My grandfather, the man I had never seen weak, was evidently fading. My inner turmoil twisted. I had never formed a deep bond with him. I often regretted not getting to know him better, but amongst the chaos of family traditions, he remained a distant figure. I was about to slip away into the recesses of the house when my grandmother's voice broke through the air. "We can't let him go not knowing how much he means to us," she said, her voice trembling and strong. Suddenly, she stood tall, the matriarch of our family, and a plan took form. I watched as the relatives clustered together, whispering intensely, their frowns transformed into determined expressions. I began to listen to their whispers. Apparently, Grandma had decided that we needed to rally around my grandfather, to share with him stories of our best memories, of laughter, family silliness, and love. With shaky breaths and hesitant nods, we agreed. It was time to stop thinking of traditions as mere obligations. We were going to create new memories, ones steeped in love and honor, and as a family, we would do it together. Reluctantly, I found a seat in the middle of the circle they formed in the living room. Each family member took turns, sharing warm anecdotes about Grandpa, how he could fall asleep at the dinner table and snort loudly, how he would scare away kids from the neighborhood during Halloween because of his over-the-top costumes, the joy in his eyes at Sunday get-togethers by the golf course. Stories tumbled out like a waterfall, cleansing the somberness of the day and bringing forth joyous laughter. Yet, with every nostalgic tale, I felt an increasing heaviness in my chest, a need to contribute, to be a part of this moment we were creating together. But what could I say when I had spent so many years on the fringes? And then, something shifted in me. I thought of the many car rides to my grandfather's house, my childhood wonder at his lawn filled with flamingos, and each calm evening spent listening to him recount stories from his youth. Slowly, almost as if guided by some unseen force, I found my voice. I shared the time he took me fishing, his patience endless even as I exclaimed, "I caught a fish," when it turned out to be a shoe. The laughter that erupted felt electric, and as I spoke, I saw my grandfather's eyes flicker to life as if awakening from a long slumber. After I shared, I could tell it resonated. My cousin chimed in next, and soon the room erupted into a veritable cacophony of love. The warmth enveloped us, and time seemed to dissipate. Hours passed in beautifully chaotic harmony, stories spilling forth like a torrent. We shared our vulnerabilities, our hopes, and cherished memories each of us had about Grandpa that we had failed to voice for so long. In those moments, I realized that this spontaneous gathering, born of a painful necessity, was its own tradition, born from love and respect and the unyielding bond of family. As the evening drew to a close, my grandfather, who had barely been speaking, suddenly cleared his throat. He looked around at all of us, lined up like dominoes, and smiled, one of those deep, heart-touching smiles. "I never realized how much I meant to all of you. Thank you for reminding me tonight. You are my greatest legacy." As he spoke those words, a thick presence hovered in the air, a profound sense of understanding dawning upon me. I had spent my life running from familial interactions, but in that moment, I found a home within them. Family was never a burden, it was a safety net, a reminder of who we are when we're lost. It was the stories we tell, the laughter we share, and sometimes the tears we cry together. In the days that followed, my grandfather's health began to stabilize, and it felt as though we had unwittingly breathed life back into him through our stories. I learned that family traditions might evolve, but the core of what they represent, the connection between souls, the sharing of memories, and the act of loving each other, remained timeless. I left that Thanksgiving with a gratitude I had never before experienced. Everyone could witness the renewed bond we had cultivated, but what truly mattered was how I had finally learned to cherish those moments and embrace my family. This experience, born of uncertainty and purpose, reshaped who I was and how I viewed family traditions. They were no longer obligations. They were the threads that held the fabric of our lives together, unique and intricate, always weaving love into our shared narratives. So now, every Thanksgiving following that day, we gather, not just to feast on turkey and pie, but to share stories. And I never miss a chance to add mine. It began as an innocent hike through the woods, a retreat from the nagging stress of my daily life. I sought solace in the sprawling greenery, hoping that nature would help restore my dwindling creativity. It was early autumn, and the trees were ablaze with oranges and golds that danced under the soft light of a waning sun. With every step, the fallen leaves crunched satisfyingly beneath my boots, almost as if the forest was whispering secrets to me with each crunch, urging me deeper into its embrace. After an hour of wandering, I stumbled upon a secluded clearing, untouched by the world. It felt as if I had stepped into a realm untouched by time, encircled by ancient oaks that towered over me like guardians. I breathed deep, inhaling the crisp, earthy scent that filled the air, and for a moment, I thought I might finally find the inspiration I so desperately sought. I settled onto a fallen log, pulling out my notebook and pen, determined to capture the splendor of this moment. I poured my heart into the pages, writing feverishly about the beauty around me, letting my thoughts flow like the nearby brook. But as I wrote, I felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in temperature, the hairs on my neck standing up, and the gentle rustling of leaves turning into an eerie whispering. I paused, listening intently, but the sound seemed to vanish just as quickly as it had appeared. I shook it off, maybe I was just tired. I returned to writing, but there was a weight in the air, an almost electric charge that prickled my skin. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch towards me, and a sudden chill made me tug my jacket tight. I looked up, ready to pack my things and head back, but something caught my eye: movement in the woods. At first, I thought it was a deer, but as I squinted into the thicket, I saw what looked like a figure, cloaked in shadows, lurking just beyond the trees. My heart raced, a mix of exhilaration and dread. Who could be out here, so far from the trail? I called out, my voice trembling, but it only echoed back, swallowed by the silence. The figure darted deeper into the woods, and against my better judgment, I felt compelled to follow. Maybe they could provide the inspiration I craved, or perhaps I was just too curious for my own good. I slipped my notebook back into my backpack and set off in pursuit, the underbrush rustling fiercely as I pushed through. The air thickened as I ventured deeper, and soon I lost sight of the figure completely. I didn't know how long I'd been walking, but the light had almost completely faded, leaving me in a growing darkness that felt alive. Panic crept in, but as I turned to retrace my steps, I heard it again, the whispering. It was more pronounced now, as if a chorus of voices was weaving through the trees, luring me closer. Compelled by an unknown force, I moved forward, driven by the need to uncover the mystery. The voices crescendoed, fluctuating between despair and ecstasy, and I realized they were speaking words I couldn't quite grasp. My heart hammered as I reached what seemed like a clearing, illuminated by an ethereal glow. The light swirled like mist, revealing the figure I'd originally spotted. It stood there, not a human, but something otherworldly, its features obscured yet hauntingly beautiful. It raised a hand, gesturing for me to approach, and I took a hesitant step forward, unable to tear my gaze away. The whispers grew louder, more intoxicating, and I could feel my thoughts unravel, thoughts of deadlines and worries dissolving into the tranquil beauty enveloping me. As I stepped into the light, a sense of overwhelming serenity washed over me, and I felt suspended between reality and this dreamlike state. The entity spoke then, its voice was like music, each word resonating deep within me, sparking emotions I didn't know I had buried. Embrace your fears, for in them lies your true art. You seek inspiration, but inspiration demands surrender. I felt a shiver race up my spine, sensing truth in its words. The trees began to sway, and the very fabric of the clearing felt alive, pulsating in sync with my heartbeat. But just as quickly as it had begun, the moment shattered. The glow flickered, the whispers turned to frantic murmurs, and I stumbled back, trying to process what I had just experienced. The figure vanished into the shadows, leaving behind an unsettling emptiness. Panic surged within me, and I turned to run, heart pounding as the forest closed in around me, branches clawing at my clothes like desperate hands. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, pleading for me to stay, and all I could think of was escaping. I finally burst free from the woods, gasping for breath as I reached the edge of the trail, the boundary between the familiar and the unknown. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing, grappling with the surreal experience of it all. I collapsed into the driver's seat, trembling and disoriented, the neon lights of my phone flickering to life like beacons of reality. I drove home feeling like I had just brushed against something far beyond my comprehension. That night, I lay awake, haunted by the figure and the whispers, unable to shake the profound realization that I had encountered something deeply mystical. I felt an awakening within me, a spark ignited in the depths of my creativity. They were right, inspiration was about surrendering to the unknown, embracing the chaotic beauty of fear and uncertainty. The very next day, I sat at my desk and began to write the story of my encounter. But as the words flowed, I noticed something strange. No matter how I tried to capture the moment, the deeper truth eluded me, lingering just out of reach. It was then I realized that inspiration doesn't come as a singular moment of clarity, it comes in waves, riding the currents of our fears and fantasies, and sometimes it demands more than we're willing to give. In the days that followed, I returned to that hike again and again, each time hoping to recapture that ethereal experience. But each time, I was met with silence, the whispers faded into echoes, and no sight of the familiar figure emerged. I understood then that it was never about finding inspiration in nature, it was about understanding the relationship we have with fear, with the mysteries that lie beyond our comfort zones. It was about the reflective moments we spend seeking, and occasionally, it would find us when we least expect it. So, if you ever wander into the woods and hear whispers calling your name, do not run. Embrace it, meet it head on. It may just unlock the inspiration you've been searching for all along. I never considered myself a bad communicator, but when my girlfriend Lily ended things, reality hit me harder than a punch to the gut. I thought we had it all figured out, but clearly, something wasn't clicking. It wasn't until she packed her things and walked out the door, leaving me with the stinging words "you just never listen" echoing in my mind, that I realized I had to make an effort to change. I stumbled through the initial days of our breakup, drowning my sorrows in binge-watching shows and lofty delusions of winning her back with grand gestures. But as the shock wore off, a twisted curiosity about my failures crept in. I started obsessively retracing our conversations. Texts, late-night talks, all those moments when I thought I was there for her but apparently wasn't. I noticed a pattern. When she opened up, I responded with platitudes or worse, tried to offer solutions instead of listening. It was as if I heard her but didn't really hear her. One night, deep in my rabbit hole of self-reflection, I came across a forum post on an obscure website, titled "How I Learned to Communicate with the Dead." At first, I dismissed it as another incredible hoax, but my morbid curiosity got the better of me. It described a mystical experience involving a one-of-a-kind seance led by a woman named Agnes, who claimed to connect you not just with the deceased but deeper aspects of yourself. It quickly became my obsession. After hours of searching, I found her old shop tucked away in an alley at the edge of town. I hesitated, an uneasy feeling washing over me as I approached the creaky door. Inside, the dim light flickered ominously, and the air was heavy with incense. Agnes was an elderly woman, with wild white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You're here for answers," she stated, almost like a revelation. I nodded, feeling foolish yet strangely compelled by her presence. As she prepared for the séance, she filled the room with an eerie calmness that lulled my anxiety. The candles flickered more with each moment, and the air thickened, almost buzzing with anticipation. "To communicate better, we need to quiet the noise within you." She instructed me to focus on my breath, to strip away the clutter of my thoughts, emotions, and insecurities. I closed my eyes and tried. It was a strange mix of calming and chaos, the constant chatter of self-doubt warring against her voice like an undefeated champion. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the candles flickering wildly, shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Agnes held my gaze, and that's when I felt it, a rush of memories, voices, and emotions flooding my mind. The spirit, she said, represented all those moments I had swept aside. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of my regrets. Around midnight, I felt as if I had transcended time, hanging on to every single word whispered from the echoes of past arguments with Lily, her voice ringing crystal clear in my mind. I felt her pain, her frustration at my indifference. I was reliving every moment I had neglected her feelings. The weight of it all hit me like a freight train, and I found myself pleading out loud, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Why didn't I see it?" But Agnes simply smiled knowingly, her gaze unwavering. "You can't change the past, but you can learn from it. Open your heart and mind to others." When the séance ended, and I stumbled out of the shop, the world seemed different. Colors were brighter, sounds were sharper. In that disorienting moment, I realized communication wasn't about the words themselves, it was about truly listening and understanding the emotions behind them. The next day, I sent Lily a text, a simple message asking if she would be open to talking. Surprisingly, she replied almost immediately. We agreed to meet at our favorite cafe, a place filled with bittersweet memories. My palms were sweaty as I sat down with my coffee, the aroma filling my senses. When she arrived, we exchanged tentative smiles. I had rehearsed what to say 1,000 times over, but all that planning felt unnecessary now that I was faced with her. I started by apologizing, not just for the breakup, but for the times I hadn't listened. To my amazement, her eyes softened, she shared her perspective on everything, and I listened. It felt as if I was hearing her for the first time. As our conversation flowed, I realized that she was still the same, but I had changed. I asked her to tell me about her day, her feelings, even her dreams, all the things I had pushed aside in the past. For the first time, I focused solely on her words, absorbing the emotions behind them. It was awkward and difficult at times because trusting each other again felt like a fragile dance. But as we talked, I began to understand the nuances of communication, the subtleties of patience and empathy. When our conversation came to an end, I was left in awe of the progress we made in just one meeting. We didn't rush back into a relationship, but we established a foundation of understanding that hadn't been there before. I realized truly listening was just as important as talking. That night, I reflected on the experience, how a seance had shown me the ghosts of my actions. It wasn't the supernatural that had changed me, it was the realization of my shortcomings. Days turned into weeks, and Lily and I started to rebuild our connection slowly. There were still bumps along the way, misunderstandings that popped up from time to time, but now, instead of deflecting or dodging them, we faced each issue head-on. Each conversation built more trust, we laughed together, cried together, and, most importantly, we learned how to communicate. I embraced that vulnerability, and it became natural to probe deeper, ask more questions, and show genuine interest in her feelings. I learned not to see silence as an enemy to fill with chatter, but as an opportunity to reflect or understand. Months passed, and one evening on a back porch, while watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to Lily and said, "I'm grateful for everything, even the tough times. They made me better." She smiled at me softly, those eyes sparkling with a knowing light as she replied, "I think we both learned a lot, didn't we?" And in that moment, I understood that communication was an ongoing journey, not a destination. It was about empathy, listening, and really valuing what each partner brought to the relationship. I never did see Agnes again, but her words lingered, a soft reminder of how I learned to communicate better in my relationships without the need for spirits or seance. There's a ghost of sorts in every relationship, it's just up to us to confront them. I'm not sure how to start this post, but I need to get it off my chest. It happened last week, and I still can't shake the feeling that I've been utterly humbled. I guess we all think we have things figured out at some point in our lives, right? I mean, I was the one everyone came to for advice about life, relationships, and even the best place to find a good coffee in town. Until that day, I wore my confidence like a badge of honor. I had everything in control. Well, that was until I took my dog, Max, for our usual evening walk through the park. The twilight settled in, casting long shadows of the trees across the softly lit paths. It was an ordinary night, just me and my four-legged companion enjoying the crisp air. As we strolled, I noticed a flicker of movement in the bushes just off the path. It caught my attention. I assumed it was just a raccoon or some other harmless creature. But then, out jumped this scruffy-looking old man, his clothes tattered and stained. He had a wild look in his eyes, and my instincts told me to keep walking. But there was something about him that made me stop. Maybe it was the urgency in his voice or the frenzied energy radiating from him as he approached. "You need to be careful," he warned, his voice gravelly and low. "There are things lurking around here that you can't see," I chuckled, thinking it was some kind of performance art piece or perhaps a homeless man spinning tales to entertain himself. "What do you mean?" I asked, skepticism dripping from my words. "You think you're safe, huh?" He leaned in closer, and I recoiled a bit from the stench of sweat and something far worse. "The shadows have teeth. They're not just figments of your imagination, kid. They're real, and they feed on ignorance." I rolled my eyes, trying to think of an escape route for my evening. "Listen, old man, I appreciate the warning, but I'm fine." He reached out, almost grasping my arm, as blazing like the fire of a man who's seen things. "You don't know what you're dealing with. What happens when they see you see them?" The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine, but I shook it off. I wanted to walk away, to forget about this wretched figure as just another crackpot. I pulled Max closer and turned to leave. That's when the world shifted. The wind seemed to whip up from nowhere, chilling my bones. I glanced back, and the old man was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there. A chill shot down my spine. I rationalized away the feeling of dread that crept in. After all, it was just a crazy old guy, right? I hurried home, Max at my side, and tried to forget the encounter. But over the next few days, I started to notice weird things. It started small, a shadow darting just outside the corner of my vision, whispers that seemed to skip by like a breeze but left an unsettling chill behind. I told myself I was overreacting, just my imagination getting the best of me. But then one evening while watching TV, I noticed the lights flickering. As I reached for the remote, I caught a glimpse of a dark shape moving outside my window. Panic shot through me, but I forced myself to look away. That night, I dreamt about the old man, his words echoing in the recesses of my mind. What happens when they see you see them? Each night, the dreams grew darker, filled with shadowy figures lurking in corners and whispers that clawed at my sanity. I tried to brush it off. Perhaps I was just stressed about work or the general weariness of life. But a gnawing fear nested deep inside, whispering that I needed to understand what was going on. That weekend, I decided to return to the park, hoping to confront whatever shadow waited for me there. I was apprehensive, heart pounding in my chest as I walked along the familiar path, Max trotting beside me. It was just as it had been that night, a warm dusk settling among the trees. But this time, it felt different. The park was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. As I explored deeper, I felt the oppressive weight of something watching me. I frowned, recalling the crazy old man's words, and I allowed myself to drift into my thoughts. Suddenly, an overwhelming sense of dread consumed me. I turned around to head back, feeling a sensation like icy fingers brushing against my back. In a panic, I turned, but I was alone again. Or so I thought. In that fleeting moment, I felt it, a presence creeping at the edges of my vision. I could feel the shadows shifting, something moving just beyond the trees. I started to sprint, Max racing at my side, both of us driven by primal fear. The laughter erupted from within the shadows, voices overlapping in a cacophony that sliced through the silence like a knife. "You shouldn't have come back," they hissed. "Now you can see us." I barely made it home that night. The shadows seemed to follow me, reaching into my thoughts and twisting them. I slammed the door shut behind me, breathless and terrified, thinking maybe I should have listened to that old man. As the days passed, it became impossible to ignore what was happening. I began researching online, digging deeper into cryptic forums filled with stories of darkness and fear, things similar to what I was experiencing. Unseen entities, shadow people, they called them. My confidence fractured as I learned about how many people had experienced being watched, tormented by something lying just out of sight. The realization hit me hard, I wasn't special or untouchable. I had become complacent, treating the world with a sense of superiority that was naive at best. Ignorance is a terrible thing. I finally sought help, turning to a local paranormal group who claimed they dealt with shadow entities. With their guidance, I faced whatever was lurking in the darkness one last time. I stood in the park again, but this time with a few others who understood what was happening. As they prepared their rituals and protections, I could feel the weight of the unseen pressing in on us. I finally understood the humble truth: there was so much more to this world than we understand. The old man was right, the shadows had teeth. After a long night fraught with fear and revelation, we managed to confront the darkness, learning what we needed to return to the light. I left the park feeling exhausted but strangely renewed. I've since adopted a new outlook on life, one that involves a significant dose of humility. I learned to appreciate the beauty of what we cannot see and a healthy respect for the unknown. So, before you think you've mastered everything or that you know it all, consider this: perhaps there are shadows lurking just out of sight, and maybe, just maybe, they might teach you something invaluable if you're willing to listen. I know that I certainly did. The day I discovered my grandparents' love story began like any ordinary Saturday. I was rummaging through the attic of my childhood home, a place I had dreaded visiting for years. My parents were moving, and they were forcing me to sort through the remnants of my youth, old toys, dusty books, and a lifetime's worth of family photographs. It felt like a ghost town, the air stagnant with memories. I had stumbled upon an old wooden trunk wedged between a moth-eaten sofa and a mountain of yellowed newspapers. Curiosity piqued, I pried it open. Inside, I found an assortment of items wrapped in aged newspaper, letters, postcards, and a leather-bound journal that caught my eye. It was my grandmother's handwriting on the cover, elegant curls that danced across the leather like whispers of lost tales. I should have left it closed, buried under the weight of secrecy and time, but curiosity clawed at me, and I opened it. Flipping through the pages, I was transported into a different era, each entry revealing snippets of a vibrant romance that felt foreign and enchanting. My grandmother wrote about her first encounter with my grandfather during a summer fair in 1955. She described his laughter, deep and warm, a sound that echoed like music in her heart. They were both just teenagers then, wild and free, caught up in the splendor of youth. What was intoxicating was how real it all felt. With each turn of the page, a rich tapestry of their courtship unfolded, starlit dances, secret picnic dates under the sprawling oak tree by the lake, and the joy of young love that knew no bounds. That's when things took a dark turn. A new entry spoke of a shadow that had fallen over their blissful days. My grandmother wrote about her father's disapproval, how he believed that my grandfather was beneath her, a mere son of a farmer in a world that demanded wealth and status. The tension grew palpable as I read about the clandestine meetings they arranged, the stolen kisses behind the barn and the promises shared under the fading sunset. Each line vibrated with a sense of urgency, and for the first time, I felt as if I was not just an observer but a participant in their unfolding saga. But then, just as I was getting enveloped in their enchantment, the journal entries abruptly stopped. The next few pages were blank, the silence deafening after the symphony of their love. Frantically, I flipped back and forth, searching for what had happened next, but the story faded into silence. My heart pounded in my chest as unease crept into my bones. As if sensing my discontent, the trunk gave way to a letter peeking out from the side. It was yellowed and fragile, but unmistakably addressed to my grandmother. Curiosity turned to dread as I pried it free, revealing not only her name but also a grand reveal. It was a love letter from my grandfather, one he had written during an absence, full of longing and poetry, but the date was strange. It was dated 2 weeks after my grandmother had last written in her journal. The writing flowed like honey, but it also bore a chilling thrill as I read the words, "To my dearest Clara, every day without you feels like a lifetime. But the fight is not yet over. I won't give up on us. I cannot live in this world without your light." My mind raced. Was she okay? Had something happened? I searched through the trunk, desperately flipping through every corner, until I found something, a newspaper clipping. The headline screamed of tragedy, "Local boy lost in farm accident." My heart froze as I pieced it together. It was my grandfather. He had died tragically just weeks after that letter. I could feel the tears prick at my eyes as I imagined my grandmother's anguish, her dreams shattered in a moment of careless fate. But the worst was yet to come. The fading ink led into another section of the journal, one that seemed different now, heavier. I turned the page and something slipped out, a thin, delicate photograph. It was a picture of my grandmother, eyes filled with a blend of heartache and beauty, but what struck me cold was the inscription on the back. "To my angel in heaven, I will find you again." Suddenly, the air in the attic turned thick, the memories of another life swirling around me. I had never known this side of her, the heartbreak, the lingering love for a man lost to fate. In that moment, I felt like I was trespassing in their world, a world where love and loss danced together in an eternal embrace. The old chest soon became a grave marker for my grandfather's untold story, a love suspended in time. Stepping back, I surveyed my surroundings, the silence of the attic now haunting. The remnants of my grandmother's love story echoed in my core like a ghost, compelling me to carry the torch forward. I needed to know what happened after the heartbreak. Did my grandmother ever find love again? Did she keep his memory alive? I dug deeper into the trunk, determined to uncover every detail of their lives, revelations waiting like shadows in the corners, and one day I decided I would tell their story. So, I meticulously transcribed her words, weaving my own narrative through their legacy, determined to share their love and loss in a way that would resonate with others. This tapestry of love was not just theirs, it rippled through time, waiting to be uncovered, and with it, the realization that every love story deserves to be told, even those entwined with heartache. And with that thought, I locked the attic door behind me, preserving the secrets of an enduring love story that could never die. As I stepped into the light, I felt the weight of their history on my shoulders, a responsibility but also a gift, a reminder that love, even when lost, has the power to transcend time, crafting new stories from the echoes of the past. I've been hesitant to share this story. I've debated with myself countless times about how to tell it, but when I read the posts here, I realize I'm not the only one living with my ghosts. I need to get this off my chest, so if you're reading this, bear with me. It all started last summer when I was working up the nerve to apply to my dream job. I had just graduated college, and this company was the pinnacle of everything I wanted to achieve, a cutting-edge tech firm with an amazing culture. I spent weeks tailoring my resume, perfecting my cover letter, rehearsing answers to common interview questions, even going so far as to consult every article I could find online to prep myself. I felt ready. The day of the interview arrived, and as I walked into the sleek downtown office building, I was a mix of excitement and nerves, flooding my veins like adrenaline. The lobby was modern and minimalist, filled with artificial plants that somehow looked too real, elegant benches, and a trickling water feature that calmed my racing heart. For a moment, I was greeted by an interviewer who seemed detached but professional. She led me into a glass conference room and we began. The interview started with the usual questions about my experience and why I wanted the job. I spoke passionately, but partway through, I noticed something. Her eyes glazed over. It felt like I was talking to a brick wall, and my confidence started to crumble. I rushed through the rest of the interview, trying to salvage my enthusiasm, but as I left, I had a sinking feeling that I had blown it. Weeks passed. I checked my email obsessively, hoping for any sign that I got the job. Every ding sent my heart racing, but each time, it was just another generic email or a spam message. The rejection email came on a Friday as I was sitting on my bed, scrolling mindlessly on social media. Thank you for your application. We appreciate your time, but unfortunately, we won't be moving forward with you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I felt like the world had collapsed around me, the air heavy with disappointment. I tried to tell myself it was okay, not everyone gets what they want. But this was different, this was crushing. I spent the next few days holed up in my room, binge-watching shows and scrolling endlessly, trying to numb the pain of failure. I kept thinking about how I was too naive, too inexperienced, too everything. My self-worth plummeted. Just when I thought I was at my lowest, it became worse. A strange noise emerged from my bedroom wall, a low humming sound that at first made me think my childhood home was settling. But as the days passed, I knew it wasn't that, it was something else. The humming seemed to whisper in synchronicity with my thoughts, echoing my fears and anxieties, the not good enough that had taken root in my brain. I remember laying in bed one night, wide awake, straining to listen to the wall. The sound became more pronounced, an almost melodic resonance, like the tones of a soft chime, but with an undercurrent that was disjoint and jarring. I tried to block it out, but it became a nightly ritual, a sinister lullaby ushering me into a deep, unsettling sleep. Then, in a rare moment of clarity, I decided to face whatever was causing this noise. I was tired of feeling weak, I was tired of surviving in a state of despair. Armed with a flashlight and an insatiable curiosity, I started peeling back the layers of my walls. I knocked and tapped, trying to locate the source of the humming. It was no longer just a noise, it was a call to something deeper within myself. After hours of inspection, I found a small, hidden compartment behind the baseboard in my closet. My heart raced as I pried it open to reveal a dusty old box. Inside, I found a collection of papers, faded photographs, and a small silver pendant that caught the dim light. Among the papers was a journal, my grandmother's, and it held the secrets of her life, one filled with struggles and rejections far greater than mine. As I pored over each page, I felt her strength resonate with me. She faced rejection in times of war, love lost, and battles with a society that tried to stifle her dreams. She fought hard, and while some chapters were dark, she always emerged with a glimmer of hope, a fire ignited in her heart. In some strange way, I felt as though my grandmother was speaking directly to me through that journal, urging me not to give up. It clicked, I realized rejection wasn't the end. It was a part of growth. In that moment of clarity and understanding, the humming in the wall morphed into something different. It became a melody of resilience. I took the pendant and wore it every day, a constant reminder of my grandmother's legacy and strength. I reached out to friends and family, sharing my experience and the lessons I pulled from her life. I started to write my own journey, reclaiming my narrative. I was no longer just the girl who faced rejection, I was someone who would grow from it. That summer turned into a season of self-reflection, a reckoning that felt heavy but beautiful. I began volunteering and taking on freelance projects that reinvigorated my passion for technology. Then, just as I found my footing, something incredible happened. I was approached by a different tech company, one I hadn't even considered applying to. They had heard about my freelance work and wanted to interview me. I went into that interview with a new perspective. This time, I was confident, knowing I was worth it no matter the outcome. When they offered me the position, it wasn't just a job, it was a testament to the journey I had taken, a realization that rejection didn't define me. It was just a stepping stone towards something better. So here I am now, sharing this story with you not just as a tale of overcoming but as an embodiment of resilience. Sometimes our darkest moments bring forth the flames that illuminate our paths. And that humming? Well, as I've come to discover, it wasn't just a noise, it was a call for me to rise beyond my failures and embrace my story, making me stronger along the way. If you're facing rejection or despair, remember it isn't the end, it could just be the beginning of something incredible. There was a time in my life when things just seemed too easy. I was coasting through my late teens in a haze of indifference. My friends and I had a routine. We'd meet up at the old abandoned factory just outside of town, a place we claimed was haunted. None of us believed the stories, about a man who had vanished in its shadows or whispers of a girl in white drifting through the crumbling walls, but we gravitated there anyway, daring each other to creep deeper into its maze of rusted metal and shattered glass. It was during one of these impromptu adventure nights that I found something strange. The group had split up, as usual, and I wandered off, feeling cocky. I'd always been the one not to retreat in fear. I stumbled upon an old filing cabinet stuffed with yellowing documents, pages rotting but still legible, revealing a dark past of shady experiments and missing persons. As I flicked through those pages, the names meant nothing to me, until I came across one that sent a chill down my spine. It was my own name, scrawled awkwardly in faded ink alongside a date, my date of birth. At that moment, I felt like the walls were closing in on me, and I bolted from the factory, panic clawing at my throat. I brushed it off as some sick joke, but the nagging feeling remained. Shortly after, I did something unthinkable. I shared a photo from that night on social media, claiming I had found something supernatural, exaggerating the whole experience to gain likes. I took pride in the engagement it brought. People were commenting and sharing like I was some kind of urban legend creator. But that night, it felt real. I began receiving messages from people who claimed they had been affected, strangers sharing tales of shadowy figures and eerie noises haunting their homes. I blocked them, thinking they were just trying to piggyback on my moment of fame. But they kept coming back with the same story about something lurking, something that came for them when they least expected it. I laughed it off until one night, I heard a scratching noise outside my window. My heart raced. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, but the sound persisted. I drew the curtains and stared into the dark, my breath catching in my throat as I saw a figure standing in my yard, its form indistinct but eerily familiar. I shut my eyes tightly, convincing myself I was just imagining it. The scratching stopped, but my mind was spinning. Had I invited this entity into my life with my careless words? Over the weeks that followed, the visits didn't stop, only they became more disturbing. My friends were now threatened, each recounting their own horror stories that matched the strange occurrences in my life. One friend was convinced she found an actual voicemail on her phone from me, except her phone showed that I never called her. Another woke up to find her entire room rearranged in patterns that shouldn't be possible. The group was slowly unraveling, each of us fearing what we'd unleashed. Clarity broke through my stubbornness when I realized the references to my name weren't merely coincidence, they were a warning. I wanted to reach out to those who had contacted me, but now I felt too much shame. I was the one who had fueled this by spinning a story for a few cheap thrills. During a confrontation in the factory, my friends attempted to confront me about my responsibility. The air was thick with accusations, the accusations that only made my shame deeper. "You opened something, and now we're cursed," Amanda shouted. But I was too stubborn, too proud to admit that I was the one who had set this all in motion. How could I? I turned away, even while a dark shadow began creeping behind them. I shook my head, trying to deny the darkness. Yet there it loomed, large, swirling, a malevolent presence formed of our collective fear. It reached out and grasped Amanda, dragging her into the darkness with a blood-curdling scream that sent shivers down my spine. I had thought it was all a prank, something that would fade away like a viral trend. But what stood before me was pure terror, tangible and merciless. I couldn't let it take me too. I couldn't let my actions extend their reach any further. Without thinking, I lunged back towards the very filing cabinet where I first found the documents. It felt ridiculous, like I was searching for some mystical solution to erase my sins. But as I threw open the cabinet doors, I was greeted with the same old papers and a bitter recollection of the warning they provided. I grabbed a crumpled sheet, my heart pounding as I skimmed through names. Among them, I found a pattern. All involved had one thing in common: they'd engaged with the shadows, unknowingly warning others just to get a glimpse of the thrill. I remembered one name, Helena, an urban legend of a girl who disappeared near the factory years ago. It dawned on me that all along, I had been casting my own shadow on her story. In that overwhelming moment of guilt, I began to cry out her name with a mantra, pleading for her forgiveness. Helena, I'm sorry. Please, I can't let this continue. As I shouted, the entity paused, releasing Amanda, who fell to the ground gasping. My heart raced as it spoke, not with words, but through the echoing shadows that murmured and resonated throughout the factory. You face the consequences of your actions, return what you have taken. Suddenly, the shadows began to retreat, spiraling back into one large mass hovering above my head. It was a tornado of energy, and it wanted retribution. I clutched Amanda and dragged her from the visible chaos, the weight of my regret forcing every step. I would face this alone. I returned to the factory, clutching that crumpled document, screaming until losing my voice, murmuring the names written on the faded pages, hoping it would appease the darkness I had called. Helena, I'm sorry. I begged. Please forgive us. The shadows slowly receded with my words, turning into mist around me, until finally, they collapsed, taking the remnants of my carelessness with them. The weight lifted, but at what cost? The people I cared for were still shaken, our friendship irreparably damaged, but at least I could breathe. I walked away from that factory forever changed, a lesson learned in gravity and respect. Those who challenge the facade of legends need to realize they affect the very fabric of the stories we tell. Facing the consequences of my actions wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I now understood that sometimes, the darkness isn't just a story, but a warning waiting to be heeded. When I decided to change careers, my journey. When I decided to change careers, it felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into the unknown. I'd been working as a software developer for nearly a decade, and while the job was stable and paid well, it felt like my soul was slowly eroding with every day that passed. My entire adult life, I'd gone through the motions of working, saving, and repeating the cycle, telling myself that stability was everything. I never really questioned the path I was on because, well, it's what you're supposed to do, right? Work hard, build your life, create security for yourself. But lately, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that there was something missing. The long days spent staring at a screen, debugging code, patching systems for bugs I didn't care about, all started to feel like an endless loop of monotony. I kept it to myself for a long time, fearing what people would say if I admitted I wanted out. Friends, family, coworkers, they all expected me to stay put, climb the corporate ladder, eventually make my way to some cushy corner office where I'd be seen as successful. But I couldn't ignore the emptiness any longer. The decision to change careers wasn't an impulsive one, it was like a slow burn that had been building for years. Every morning, as I poured my coffee, I'd feel a sinking feeling in my chest, like I was being drawn into something that wasn't meant for me. Then, one morning, after another late night spent obsessing over job listings, articles on passion careers, and stories of people who left everything behind to pursue their dreams, I realized I couldn't keep lying to myself. I needed a change, and not just a small one. I wanted a fresh start, a path that would make me feel alive again. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I had this strange, almost irrational urge to pursue something creative, something where I could work with my hands. I'd always been interested in carpentry, oddly enough. Maybe it was a phase, maybe it was some leftover dream from when I was a kid building things with my dad in the garage, but the idea of working with wood, creating something tangible, felt like a way to reconnect with who I was before life pushed me into tech. It sounded crazy to everyone I told. You want to leave a six-figure salary to become a carpenter? My parents were beside themselves. Friends thought I was kidding. Even my partner thought I was just going through some sort of midlife crisis. But the more resistance I faced, the more determined I felt, like I was defending something precious that no one else could understand. I saved up for a few more months, tightening my spending, and started going to night classes in carpentry after work. The first time I handled a chisel, that rough, raw feeling of cutting into wood, the smell of sawdust filling the air, it was exhilarating. It was so different from the sterile, sanitized world of coding and offices. Here, my mistakes were real, tangible, they couldn't be fixed by a simple backspace or undo command. The wood would split if I wasn't careful, a project could be ruined in an instant, and somehow, that was what drew me in deeper. I was hooked on that feeling of raw creation. I started making small pieces at first, a few shelves, a coffee table. They were rough, far from perfect, but they were mine, created with my hands, and that was enough for me. Soon, people began to notice. A coworker asked if I'd make a table for her. Then a friend wanted a custom bookshelf. Word got around, and suddenly I had orders coming in faster than I could keep up. I was working late into the night, my apartment filled with half-finished projects, tools scattered everywhere. It was chaotic, exhausting, but I was finally doing something that felt right, like I was working towards something real, something I could be proud of. It wasn't long before I reached a crossroads. My manager called me into his office one day, mentioning that I seemed distracted lately, and that if my performance didn't improve, they'd have to reevaluate my position. Part of me wanted to laugh because I already knew what my answer would be. I walked out of that office with my head held high, knowing that I was finally breaking free. Quitting was terrifying, of course. I built my entire life around this idea of security, and here I was, throwing it all away for something that could fail at any moment. I burned my safety net, and there was no going back. But the first morning after I left that job, I felt an overwhelming sense of freedom. No alarm, no dreaded commute, just a quiet calm as I sipped my coffee, knowing I was finally doing something that mattered to me. My little woodworking business started to grow. I rented a tiny workshop, moved all my tools in, and started working full-time. The orders kept coming, and slowly, I gained a reputation for my work. People loved the personal touch I put into each piece, the way every cut, every finish told a story. I learned something else, too. There was a beauty in the imperfections, in the small flaws that made each piece unique. One day, as I was finishing up a dining table for a couple who had driven 3 hours to pick it up, the woman told me it was exactly what they'd been looking for, something handmade, crafted with care. It hit me in that moment that I was doing something meaningful, bringing a small bit of joy into people's lives with something I created with my own 2 hands. It wasn't glamorous, and I wasn't making as much money as I had before, but for the first time, I was truly happy. Looking back, I can't believe I spent so many years afraid to make this change, trapped by the fear of failure, of disappointing others. But now, standing here in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and pieces that make up my new life, I know it was all worth it. This journey taught me that sometimes, you have to take a leap, to risk everything, in order to find yourself again. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I can't help but feel like that brief moment changed everything. It started when I was driving back from a long day at work, tired and ready to sink into my couch and binge-watch something mindless to forget about the grind of my 9 to 5. The sun had started to set, casting a golden glow over the pavement, and I noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, thumbing for a ride. At first, I hesitated. The last thing I wanted to do was pick up a stranger, but something in the air felt different, almost electric. Out of nowhere, I pulled over. The figure turned out to be a young woman, probably in her late 20s. She had messy hair, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, and looked like she had been traveling for quite some time. I could see the relief wash over her face as she approached my car. "Thank you. You have no idea how long I've been waiting," she said, slipping into the passenger seat. I introduced myself, and she told me her name was Jess. As I drove, the conversation flowed more naturally than I expected. Jess spoke passionately about her dreams of becoming a photographer, about traveling the world and capturing every moment. She was going to a job interview at a local gallery and seemed so hopeful. I shared a bit about my monotonous corporate job, and she shook her head with a sympathetic smile, urging me to chase my own dreams. We pulled into a coffee shop so she could grab a quick bite before her interview. Jess thanked me again, and as she hopped out, a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, crossed her face when she glanced back at me. I waved it off, hoping she was just nervous about her upcoming interview. After she grabbed her coffee, she was all smiles, and as she stepped back into the car, I could see her excitement bubbling over. I parked in front of the gallery where her interview was being held, and she took a deep breath to calm her nerves. "You know, I have to pay this forward somehow," Jess said with a grin. "You saved my day, I can't thank you enough." She fished out a small camera from her bag and snapped a quick photo of me. "For luck," she said, flashing a smile that illuminated her face. I laughed and said I hoped it would work. After a quick goodbye, she dashed into the gallery. I pulled away and headed home, thinking about how that simple interaction felt surprisingly uplifting. But through the night and into the next day, I noticed something was off. My phone buzzed relentlessly. It was my friend Mia, sending frantic texts asking if I had heard the news. "No," I responded. "What news?" It turned out the gallery where Jess had gone for her interview was the same location where a massive explosion had occurred just an hour after I dropped her off. Reports flooded in about chaos and the lives it had impacted. I felt a chill run down my spine. Was Jess okay? Did she make it out? I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that engulfed me. I spent the entire night checking the news and social media, hoping to see a sign that she was all right. But as the hours ticked by, my heart sank deeper. It wasn't until the next morning that I finally spotted a post on a local news page showing a group of people being rescued from the wreckage. I squinted at the small thumbnails of survivors, praying she was among them. And then, there she was, dirt-streaked and wide-eyed, but alive. Relief surged through me, crawling over the fear of how close I had come to losing a total stranger. I immediately commented on the post, urging people to find her, hoping she knew how fortunate she was. Then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed with a message. It was Jess. "I'm okay," she wrote. "You saved my life." For a moment, I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "I just gave you a ride," I typed back, wrestling with confusion. "No," she replied. "I wasn't in there yet. That ride, your kindness, it made me late. I was so caught up in our conversation and chasing my dreams that I completely forgot the time. If you hadn't stopped for me, I'd have been inside when it happened." I felt lightheaded, a whirlpool of emotions crashing over me. The universe had conspired to bring us together, and I, just a regular person, had unknowingly altered the course of someone's life. Jess and I stayed in touch over the next few weeks. She told me she dedicated a photo series to the day I almost lost my life. Each picture represented a moment from that day, the ride, the coffee, the smiles, and she insisted on including me in the series, calling me her guardian angel. We eventually met up for coffee one afternoon. She was bubbling with excitement, having secured an internship from the gallery that day, despite the chaos. It felt surreal, like I was watching a movie unfold in slow motion as she talked about how she would showcase her work in exhibitions around the country. Her perspective on life was contagious. For Jess, every second mattered now more than ever. We built a beautiful friendship forged in our brief encounter, and for reasons I can't fully articulate, I started reevaluating my own life. I too began dreaming again. I ventured into photography, partly inspired by her journey. Before I knew it, we were collaborating, capturing moments that would make an impact and ignite a spark in others. My mundane existence bloomed into excitement, filled with purpose that I thought was long lost under the weight of responsibilities. An unexpected twist of fate, a shared moment, had transformed not only Jess's life but mine as well. Yet, as empowering as it felt, I couldn't shake the thought of how different our paths would have been if I hadn't pulled over that day. I often wonder about the other lives we intersect with, how small decisions ripple out into something greater. The strangest part? Time won't stop its relentless march. Days turned into months, and slowly, Jess began to grow her brand, even getting noticed by some prestigious galleries. Meanwhile, my own photography was gaining traction, and soon enough, we were viewed as up-and-coming artists in our community. But on the day when we received our invitations to showcase our work on a bigger stage, I got a text from Jess that struck the deepest chord of gratitude and joy in me. "Remember that ride?" she texted. "It changed everything." And in those words, I saw both our lives intertwined forever, realizing that who we meet in life and how we treat them could make all the difference, even if it's just a car ride on a fading evening. So the next time you're driving and see someone on the side of the road, remember, you might just be the one to shift the course of their life, or even your own. It was a dark and stormy night when I first stumbled upon the truth. I know that sounds cliché, but you'll understand soon enough why it matters. I had been chasing my dream of becoming a writer since I could remember, pouring my soul into stories, hoping to one day see my name on a bestseller list. The thrill of creating fictional worlds and the sheer joy of crafting intricate plots swept me away, but it was never enough. I was living paycheck to paycheck, working a dead-end job in a coffee shop just to afford the rent on my tiny studio. Every day, I'd scrawl thoughts into my battered notebook during my lunch breaks, dreaming of the day my words would jump off the page and resonate with others. I'd submit short stories to magazines, but rejection letters filled my inbox, often leaving me feeling more discouraged than before. Still, I pressed on because I believed one day I would create a masterpiece. One night, while aimlessly scrolling through a writer's forum, I discovered a thread titled "The Dark Side of Writing." Intrigued, I dove in, reading post after post filled with tragic tales of failed authors, backstabbing agents, and cursed manuscripts. One user, an ominous figure who went by the Watcher, posted a message that sent a chill down my spine. They claimed that the secret to success in the writing world lay not in talent or hard work, but in a ritual that could unlock unparalleled creativity. Curious and desperate, I clicked on their profile and found a personal blog that detailed their experience with this ritual. The Watcher described a ceremony involving an ancient text called the manuscribe, said to summon muses but requiring a high price, your very connection to reality. I was skeptical, of course. But the idea gnawed at me until I couldn't shake it. What if this was the key to what I needed? The last rejection letter I received had pushed me to the edge. I was tired of failing. I wanted to succeed at any cost, so I decided to look for the manuscribe. After nights of searching through various obscure second-hand bookstores and hidden corners of the internet, I finally found a seller who claimed to have it. The website was buried under pages of search results, a clear sign it was no ordinary book. When the package arrived, my heart raced. The wrapping was old, worn like it had been through some bizarre adventure of its own. The cover had faded symbols that seemed to pulse under the dim light of my apartment. I took it as a sign I had found something special. That night, I gathered supplies, a candle, a small bowl of salt, and a grimoire. I followed the instructions meticulously, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. I recited the incantation, feeling words surge through me, wrapping around my mind and filling me with the promise of creativity beyond my wildest dreams. The lights flickered as I uttered the final words, and I felt the air grow thick with energy. Suddenly, the candle blew out, plunging my tiny room into darkness. My heart raced, and I felt a presence, almost tangible, in the room with me. The writing muse had arrived, or so I thought. I could hear whispers, the echoes of countless voices intertwining with my thoughts. It all started to blur. The lines between my desires and their reality twisted impossibly. I fell into a deep sleep, a dreamless abyss that seemed to stretch for ages. When I woke up, it was morning. My first thought was to check my notebook, but something felt wrong. I flipped open the pages to discover they were filled with scrawled sentences that didn't belong to me, stories I never wrote, characters I never created. I rushed to my laptop and found dozens of documents with titles I didn't recognize. I read through page after page of brilliantly crafted prose, mind-boggling plots, and unforgettable characters I clearly did not conceive. It was exhilarating but terrifying. I was elated to discover these stories existed, but I had no memory of creating them. I began to share these stories online, initially claiming they were my own. They received immediate attention, and soon enough, I was receiving offers from publishers. My dream was finally coming true, but the entire time, a small voice nagged at the back of my mind, a whisper of doubt. After a few months, I found myself at a local literary festival, standing at a booth dedicated to my now published works. I smiled for the camera, waved to fans who wanted autographs, but I felt hollow inside. A lurking emptiness began to consume me. I had given up pieces of myself without even realizing it. One night, I couldn't sleep, the weight of this growing unease pressed hard against my chest. I flipped through the pages of the manuscribe, searching for answers, clues, anything. But as I read, my heart dropped. The final pages, the ones with the instructions for the ritual, weren't anywhere to be found. I felt panicked, like I had dropped my lifeline into a void. Desperate for clarity, I reached out to the Watcher through the forum, begging for advice. Days passed with no reply, and my anxiety turned into a spiral of paranoia. What if I had unleashed something dark within myself? I began to read the stories I had written for days, trying to find a hint or a signal. Then I discovered something chilling. The protagonists in these stories were eerily similar to people I knew. Friends, co-workers, even family were woven into the narratives, but not as heroes. They were tortured shadows, reflecting their dark sides and insecurities. I felt sick. It was almost as if this entity, this muse I had summoned, didn't just gift me stories, it wanted to destroy them, to consume their essence through my words. I tried to write my own story again, but nothing came. I sat in front of the blank page for hours, writing and deleting over and over again, my own voice drowned out by the murmurs of the narratives already created. My pen trembled in fear as I felt it navigate toward darker themes that weren't mine but were pulled from the nether. I realized I was no longer chasing the dream I had envisioned, I was being puppeteered by my demons, and my imagination had become a prison. I had to put an end to it. So, I decided to confront the watcher on the writing forum. I posted a direct message, pleading for help and warning others about the manuscript. The response was swift, unexpected. A user named Read102 wrote, "You've dug too deep, haven't you? The stories are not yours to own. Burn it. You must burn the manuscript before it claims more than you realize." I felt a rush of cold air as the realization set in. The ritual wasn't merely a trick but a binding, trapping my identity and amplifying my fears. I gathered the courage, my heart racing, and raced back to my apartment. The moment I held the book in my hands again, I felt the tug of something sinister, a connection I wasn't ready to sever. But nothing mattered, I had to destroy it. With shaking hands, I doused it in lighter fluid and set it aflame outside my apartment. As it burned, I felt pieces of myself slip away in the smoke. I hadn't just given up my dreams, I had surrendered my reality to a darker ambition. The flames flickered and danced before finally collapsing in on themselves. The fire was consuming the book, but as it disintegrated, I heard grim whispers echoing around me. "You can't escape us." I recoiled, my heart pounding as an icy breeze enveloped me, chill whispering in my ear. The moment I realized I was chasing the wrong dream wasn't when I burnt the manuscript, but when I glimpsed the shadows creeping at the edges of my mind, reminding me that ambition can sometimes lead you to places where the price is far too steep. I wish I could say it ended there, that I walked away unscathed, but the shadows still linger. Life moved on, but those stories, those characters, they have a way of seeping back into my thoughts. I'm still writing, but never again with the same fervor. Now, I look over my shoulder, and every night I can feel the whispers haunt me, taunting me, waiting to see if I'll ever come back from my abandoned dreams. Make sure you choose your ambitions wisely. The moment you realize you're chasing the wrong dream can turn into a nightmare. I've never considered myself a writer. I scribbled half-hearted poetry in high school, and my journal entries were mostly filled with mundane observations about my boring life, but during a particularly rough patch last year, when my motivation was at an all-time low, I found inspiration in an unlikely place, a rundown gas station on the outskirts of town. On a chilly autumn night, the kind that bites at your cheeks and sends shivers down your spine, I pulled off the highway, desperate for a caffeine fix and to stretch my legs on the long drive to my sister's house. The gas station promised little, the flickering fluorescent lights buzzed like angry bees, and the sign out front was partially broken, with some of the letters burnt out. Still, it was open, and it seemed like the only option this deep in the woods. I pushed through the heavy glass door, and the smell hit me, mix of stale coffee, fried food, and something I couldn't quite place, maybe despair? There was only one clerk behind the counter, a balding man in his 50s who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He barely acknowledged me as I made my way to the coffee machine, struggling to pour the hot liquid from an oversized pot that looked like it had survived a nuclear war. Just as I poured the coffee, I heard a loud clatter near the back of the store. My heart jumped because I was utterly alone in this place. I turned to check it out, the darkness suspiciously thick in one corner, and that's when I saw her, a girl, maybe 16, sitting on the floor surrounded by a collection of bright-colored books. They were stacked around her like a fortress on the filthy linoleum. At first glance, she looked out of place in the dump. She had vibrant green hair that contrasted sharply with the dingy surroundings, wearing a graphic tee with some obscure band name that made me think she had a life worth living, a stark difference from my monotonous existence. I hesitated, wondering if I should say something to her, but she looked engrossed in whatever story had captured her attention. I couldn't help but take a step closer and read the titles scattered around her. There were stories about haunted houses, alternate realities, and cryptic mysteries. I recognized the names. These were the types of books I avoided out of fear that they might shake up my stagnant life. Suddenly, the girl glanced up at me, her green eyes bright and piercing. "Are you a writer?" she asked, and for a fleeting moment, I felt exposed. "No," I replied, more uncertain than I'd like to admit. "But I've thought about it." She scoffed. "Thinking doesn't count. You either create or you don't. This place," she gestured around the dingy gas station, "is like a black hole that takes away inspiration. You have to fight against it." There was something about how she said it that made me curious. I sat down cross-legged across from her, cradling my coffee in my hands. "What do you know about creativity? You're just a kid." She shrugged. "You're old enough to feel stuck, aren't you?" It struck me harder than I expected, but something in her gaze pierced through the haze of my self-doubt. I wanted to laugh, to brush off her insight as typical teenage arrogance, but instead, I felt oddly seen. With the darkness of the store looming around us, she started telling me about a dream she had, a world where shadows held whispers of inspiration and created stories of lost souls. The longer she talked, the more vivid her words became, pulling me into her imaginative landscape, where ideas danced like fireflies, and every whispered shadow had a story waiting to be told. For the first time in months, I felt the familiar prick of creative energy stirring in my heart. Then, just as quickly as our conversation ignited, the lights flickered violently, causing us both to jump. The clerk, who had been presiding over the transaction at the register like a king fallen asleep in his throne, finally found the strength to cough, breaking what had turned into a trance-like sharing of dreams. Suddenly, the girl stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked past me with wide eyes. "We should go," she said, urgency bleeding into her previously laid-back tone. "What do you mean?" I asked, grasping my coffee tighter, feeling the heat radiate through my fingers. She didn't respond. Instead, she scrambled to gather her books, sliding them into a worn knapsack. "Why are you even here?" I muttered, bewildered by her sudden shift in demeanor. "It doesn't matter. You need to go while you still can. This place isn't safe." I frowned. "What do you mean? Is it haunted or something?" Her eyes locked onto mine, and in the depth of her green gaze, I noticed an unease, a depth that made my heart race with panic. "Not in the way you think," she said, her voice trembled, "but sometimes, the shadows that inspire can suffocate you." I stood there, frozen in disbelief as if she had just spoken a cryptic incantation. The lights flickered again with a sharp crack, and suddenly the dim atmosphere thickened, almost suffocating. I caught the clerk staring blankly at the wall, as if the life had been drained out of him. "Look, I'm not leaving without at least understanding what you mean," I demanded as the shadows seemed to stretch towards me, seeping with something cold and heavy. She frowned at me, muttering an exasperated "You don't get it." But just then, the gas station door swung open, and an icy gust swept through, extinguishing the flickering lights until it was pitch black. I could barely see the girl anymore. "What do you see?" I shouted into the darkness. "Stories," she replied quietly, the sound of her voice trembling in the surrounding void. "But you can't let them absorb you." Fear seized me, and I stumbled back toward the broken exit sign that illuminated the outline of the door. Just as I reached it, I felt a pull, like an unseen force trying to draw me back into the darkness. I hesitated, feeling the weight of failure settle on my shoulders, but the image of that girl, encircled by her fortress of books, ignited a spark of courage within me. In that vulnerable moment, I chose to fight against the shadows. I burst through the door, almost tripping in my haste, and stumbled into the biting cold night air. As I caught my breath, the lights returned to the gas station, and through the glass, I could see the clerk staring intently at the spot where the girl had sat. What had just happened? I looked back toward the entrance, but she was gone. Dread filled my heart, as if this place had swallowed her whole. But as I walked toward my car, still holding the hot coffee in my hands, I couldn't shake off that sense of inspiration. I drove away, heart racing not from fear but from exhilaration, feeling as if I had been handed a secret gift, the promise of untold stories that could leap from shadows into my mind. The drive felt shorter, the world around me reanimated as I began to sketch ideas for a new story, something dark, something real, inspired by a fleeting moment in a gas station I never intended to stop at. Even now, that girl feels like an echo, an unlikely muse trapped in a place meant for nothing but fuel and snacks. I still think about her sometimes, wondering if she's out there, conjuring stories from her dreams or maybe trapped in some poetic realm of her own making. But I no longer fear those shadows. Instead, I embrace them. I've since taken the leap to pursue writing, inspired by that dark, bizarre encounter in a gas station, reminding me that sometimes creativity finds us in the most unexpected places, even where shadows dance to tempt us with dark, haunting stories. Title: How I Rediscovered My Passion for Life. For as long as I can remember, I had been drifting through life, rising and setting with the sun, but never truly feeling alive. The colors of my existence faded into dull shades of gray, the vibrant laughter of childhood memories became echoes lost in the halls of time, and a day seemed no more than a monotonous cycle of work, sleep, eat, repeat. My friends often commented on my gloomy disposition, urging me to get out more, to find a hobby, to shake off the cobwebs that clung to my spirit, but every suggestion fell flat. I grew accustomed to my solitude, cocooned within the walls of my small, dimly lit apartment, where I could lose myself in the abyss of Netflix or the hypnotic allure of video games, all the while blanketing myself with excuses for avoiding real-life interactions. It was during one of those apathetic evenings, scrolling through a seemingly endless feed of social media, that I stumbled upon an ad for a local art gallery. The gazes from the portraits seemed to reach out, whispering quiet invitations to explore, to be bold, and, most crucially, to feel. Something about it stirred a long-buried wish in me, but I quickly dismissed it, shoving the thought aside as I sunk deeper into the comfort of my cocoon. A couple of days passed, and as I maintained my routine of isolation, that nagging feeling only grew louder, a little voice in my head daring me to step outside my comfort zone. It was a Saturday when I finally kicked my own ass off the couch, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination coiling in my stomach. I took a shower, the steam filled the tiny bathroom mirroring how I felt, renewed yet uncertain. After wrestling with my reflection for a few moments, I dressed casually, a reminder that I could choose comfort, and hopped on the bus to the gallery. The afternoon sun warmed my shoulders, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I breathed in the world around me. When I arrived, the gallery buzzed with life, a stark contrast to my silent existence. People mingled, discussing pieces that ignited their creative spirits. I roamed, feeling like a ghost in a realm of excitement, until a particular painting caught my eye. It depicted a single tree growing triumphantly in a barren, cracked land, its roots sprawled wide and deep. It spoke to me in ways I couldn't understand, its defiance stirred an ember inside, a feeling of resilience I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Suddenly, an overwhelming urge came over me, a desire to create. The weight of this moment hit me hard like a flood. I needed to paint. I needed to pour my soul onto canvas just as the artist had done. But, with that urge came fear. I hadn't held a paintbrush since grade school, where messy finger painting had felt like the most scandalous form of rebellion. The idea of failure paralyzed me, the judgment of others loomed like shadows, but something inside snapped. I fought through my hesitation, purchasing a small canvas and basic art supplies from a nearby store, holding them like fragile promises in my hands, and returned home. Back in my dim apartment, with supplies spread out like a cathartic invitation upon the table, I hesitated. Thoughts swirled, a cacophony of doubts that insisted I inadequately possessed any artistic skill. Yet, as I sat there, I could still see the tree, vibrant and bold, whispering encouragement through the cracks of my self-doubt. It compelled me to begin. I dabbed my brush into the paint tentatively, as if welcoming a long-lost friend back into my life. With each stroke, colors began to emerge, swirling and blending together, creating shapes that hadn't existed before. Time slipped away. Hours evaporated as I lost myself in the rhythm, the motion, the expression. The more I painted, the more I realized how alive I felt. My heart raced, I laughed aloud at the spontaneity, surprised at how the prison of my past self began to crumble with every brushstroke. I didn't care about perfection. All I focused on was the flow, the vividness bursting forth, each stroke urging more out of me, pulling buried emotions to the surface. At that moment, utterly absorbed in the creation before me, I rediscovered my passion for life. I finished the piece late that night. Gaze locked onto the colors swirling, dancing, and surprisingly alive on the canvas, I placed it on the wall opposite my bed. Every day I would awaken and see it, a vibrant reminder that beauty lives within even the darkest of paths. The rebirth of my passion didn't end with that painting. I soon found myself seeking out art shows, joining classes, and engaging with individuals who enlightened my world, breathing life into my lonely existence. Shadows of doubt lingered, but they began to fade like the lingering echoes of a distant memory, replaced by the confidence forged through exploration and creativity. My life transformed radically. I shifted from the dimness of solitude into a tapestry woven with laughter, colors, and connections. Friends began filling my home, sharing stories over cups of tea and spontaneous art sessions, as I ignited the creative spark in others just as I had within myself. It was an extraordinary shift, life transformed into vibrant chaos, a journey through the colorful maze of emotions, experiences, and connections. The rebirth of my passion didn't come without a cost. Existential questions haunted me still during the stillness, reminding me of the darkness I'd emerged from. However, in contrast to my previous life of gray, I found peace in embracing the cycle of emotion, understanding that darkness and light could coexist. Inspiration flowed as I balanced painting with writing, multifaceted media beginning to intertwine in ways I never anticipated. I joined local exhibitions and showcased my work. I felt alive. I was alive. A year later, my art was even featured in a gallery. I stood, nervously biting my lip, surrounded by radiant faces, the laughter echoing around me drowning out my fears. But in that moment, standing beside my creation, I reminded myself of the pivotal Saturday I had wandered into that art gallery a mere year ago. This was the true essence of it all, rediscovering my passion for life not just in art, but in connections with others, in shared experiences, in the reminder that each shadow can lead you to find light anew. I took a deep breath, allowing the laughter and excitement to wash over me. I was finally home in more ways than one. Life was no longer an array of gray, it had transformed into a masterpiece, vibrant, untamed, and unpredictable, just like me. When I met my best friend's parents, the awkward encounter. It was the day I had been dreading for weeks. My best friend, Emily, had been asking me to meet her parents for months, but I kept putting it off, not because I didn't want to meet them, but because I wasn't sure if I was ready for the inevitable awkwardness. I had heard stories about her parents, how they were traditional, strict, and expected a lot from the people Emily surrounded herself with, especially her friends. I was nervous, not knowing what to expect. I had been friends with Emily for years, but meeting her parents felt like a rite of passage I wasn't sure I was prepared for. It all started on a Saturday afternoon when Emily called me, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner. I hesitated for a moment, knowing what that meant, but I agreed. I spent the entire afternoon psyching myself up, trying to figure out what to wear, how to act, and what to say. I knew I had to be on my best behavior, but I also didn't want to come off as stiff and forced. I wanted them to like me, but I didn't want to pretend to be someone I wasn't. By the time I arrived at Emily's house, I was already a bundle of nerves. I parked my car in front of the house, took a deep breath, and forced myself to walk up to the front door. Emily greeted me with her usual warm smile, and I could tell she was just as excited for me to meet her parents as I was terrified. "You're going to be fine," she assured me. "They're not as scary as they seem." Easy for her to say. She had known them her entire life. I followed her inside, where the smell of a home-cooked meal hit me immediately. It was comforting but also made my stomach turn with anxiety. I wasn't sure if it was the food or the situation. Emily led me to the dining room, where her parents were already sitting. Her dad was in his usual spot at the head of the table, a man with a firm handshake and a serious expression. He was a lawyer, the type of person who always seemed like he was analyzing everything around him. Her mom, on the other hand, was more approachable, but her eyes always seemed to be scrutinizing me as if she could see right through me. I stood there for a moment, feeling like I had just walked into an interview. Emily introduced me, and her parents gave me polite smiles, but I could tell they weren't exactly thrilled about my presence. "It's nice to meet you," Emily's dad said with a firm handshake, his voice deep and authoritative. "Emily has told us a lot about you." I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. "It's great to meet you too, Mr. and Mrs. Davis." I tried to sound confident, but I was sure I sounded like a nervous wreck. "Please, call us Mark and Linda," her mom said, her smile softening a little. "We're so glad you could join us for dinner." I sat down, and the awkward silence that followed was deafening. Everyone was busy serving themselves, avoiding eye contact with me as I tried to figure out how to break the ice. I could already tell. I was out of my element. I wasn't used to these kinds of formal dinners. I was more of a pizza and movie night kind of person, not one to sit at a dining table with fine china and crystal glasses. I picked up my fork, pretending to be interested in the food while my mind raced. I had no idea what to say. I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to start the conversation or if I should wait for them to speak first. I could feel Emily's gaze on me, and I knew she was probably just as uncomfortable as I was. She always told me that her parents were great, but I could tell she was worried about me fitting in. I cleared my throat and decided to try to initiate some small talk. "So, Mr. Davis, what's it like being a lawyer? That must be an interesting job." He didn't look up from his plate but replied, "It's challenging, but rewarding. Lots of paperwork. Lots of arguing." I nodded, trying to appear interested, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't even sure if he was being sarcastic or not. Then, Linda, Emily's mom, chimed in, "Have you been to any nice places recently, Emily? I heard you've been traveling a lot for work." Emily nodded, and the conversation turned toward her job. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but I could feel myself getting more and more nervous. My palms were sweating, and every time I tried to make eye contact with either of them, I felt like I was being judged. I took a sip of water to calm my nerves and accidentally knocked over my glass, sending it sliding across the table. I gasped as it tipped over, and water splashed across the table, spilling onto the white tablecloth. The room went completely silent. I froze, unsure of what to do. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, grabbing a napkin to try to clean it up. But it was too late, the damage was done. Linda's eyes narrowed, and Mark simply sighed, shaking his head. "It's fine," he said, but his tone made it clear that it wasn't. I felt my face turn bright red. Emily quickly got up to help, but I could tell she was mortified, probably wishing I had just stayed home. The rest of the dinner continued, but the mood had shifted. Every time I tried to speak, my words seemed to come out wrong. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid that one wrong move would send everything crashing down. It wasn't until dessert, when the conversation shifted to more neutral ground, that things started to ease up a little. Emily's mom started talking about her love for gardening, and Mark chimed in with his obsession with fishing. I managed to squeeze in a few words, but the awkwardness was still hanging in the air. When dinner was finally over, I thought I would be able to breathe a sigh of relief, but Emily's parents insisted on showing me around the house. I followed them, nodding politely, but my anxiety was at an all-time high. They took me to the family room, where pictures of Emily and her siblings lined the walls. They were all smiling and happy, a perfect family in a perfect home. I couldn't help but feel like I didn't belong there. As we toured the rest of the house, Emily's dad told me about his extensive wine collection, and her mom gave me a lecture on the importance of good table manners. I nodded along, but inside, I was dying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was time to leave. Emily walked me to the door, and I could tell she was just as relieved as I was. "I'm so sorry about everything," I said, feeling like I had made a complete fool of myself. "Don't worry about it," Emily said, giving me a hug. "They're a little intense, but they like you. Trust me." I wasn't sure if she was just being polite or if she genuinely believed that, but I appreciated the reassurance. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but replay every awkward moment in my head. I had been too nervous, too eager to impress, and it had all backfired. I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to get past the awkwardness, but one thing was for sure, I would never look at dinner with Emily's parents the same way again. I used to think adulthood would be a clear path away from childhood traumas, but I was wrong. Last week, in the corners of my mind, I brushed against memories I thought I'd buried forever. The night started as an innocent meet-up with old friends by the lake, our childhood hangout spot, but it turned into something far darker. I hadn't seen Thomas, Sarah, and Jenna in years. We laughed, reminisced about the wild days of running through the woods, building forts, and stealing sips of cheap beer. Everything felt perfect. Until it didn't. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness crept over the water, and a sudden chill set in. We decided to take a nighttime stroll along the shore, the moon casting eerie reflections on the rippling lake. That's when Sarah suggested we share ghost stories, the kind we used to tell that raised goosebumps on our skin as kids. Everyone was in, but the mood turned when Jenna spoke up. "There's the old Adams house," she said, her voice low and trembling with something else, fear. "You remember what happened there, right?" Suddenly, laughter faded, and memories retreated into the shadows. I could practically feel the air grow thicker as she recounted the legend of a boy named Alex. Years ago, he had gone missing in that house, supposedly wandering off in search of something in the dark. It was said that he still roamed the halls, waiting for someone to find him, and if he did, he'd only show himself to people with unfinished business. I scoffed at first, brushing it off as silly storytelling, but inside, a part of me shuddered. The unfinished business line stuck with me. I had left my childhood in shambles, departing before I could confront the things that haunted me, my family's issues, my mother's suffocating love that felt more like a noose, and my father's empty chair at dinner, a constant reminder of his absence. To distract myself from the creeping dread, I decided to take a walk away from the group, feeling the cool breeze on my skin. That's when I found myself standing in front of the Adams house, its decaying frame illuminated ominously by the moonlight. I don't know how I got there. Perhaps part of me was drawn by curiosity, or perhaps it was a desperate instinct to face the silence that had haunted me for so long. Against my better judgment, I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. As if the house had been waiting for me, the musty air swallowed me whole. I could hear the floors creaking beneath my weight, a soft symphony of the past whispering secrets and sorrows. Memories flooded my mind, days spent battered by bullying, nights drenched in loneliness, and the distant echo of my parents' fights. The walls had seen it all, they almost seemed to breathe with the weight of their stories. I moved deeper into the house, compelled by a force I didn't understand. Climbing the staircase, I reached a room at the end of the hallway, a door slightly ajar. In that instant, I felt my heart race, as if my own childhood struggles were waiting there for me. I pushed the door open, and the room seemed to welcome me, coated in layers of dust and neglect. In one corner sat a child's rocking chair, its paint chipped, and on the wall hung an old photograph of a boy with bright eyes. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The boy looked eerily familiar. As I approached, memories hit me harder than before. The boy in the picture was Alex. Suddenly, I was pulled into a vivid memory from my childhood, one I had mercilessly tucked away. There was a hollow ache in my chest as I recalled a time when I had bullied Alex, a shy kid with a love for drawing. We had mocked him for his eccentricity, laughed at his art, and chased him away from the group. I remembered the day he stopped coming to school, the rumors, and the sense of guilt lounging in the back of my mind, unresolved, unknown. I hadn't known that something horrible had actually happened. It was like a cruel twist of fate that brought us both to this very house. The air thickened, the shadows twisting around me, and in that moment, I realized, Alex was not just the boy who had gone missing, he was also a part of me I'd buried under layers of denial. I was wrong, I whispered into the silence, releasing the words I had long held captive. I didn't understand. I'm sorry. At that instant, I felt a warmth envelop me, something I hadn't felt in years, a soft feather-like touch that washed over my skin like the gentlest of hugs. The room began to shimmer and glow, and I saw him standing in the corner, that same boy with bright eyes, watching me with a hopeful intensity. I forgive you, he said, his voice echoing softly around the room. Tears streamed down my cheeks as the weight of everything I had locked away began to unravel the tight grip I had on my heart. The shadows receded, and clarity found its way back into my soul. In the child's eyes, I saw both innocence and a depth of understanding that I never thought possible. Will you come back? He asked, his voice growing fainter. When you're ready, will you take what you've learned and share it with others? And with that, he began to fade. I didn't want him to leave. I will, I shouted, desperation clinging to my breath. I promise. And with that last echo, I jerked awake, finding myself lying on the floor of the abandoned room, the sun breaking through the window, washing everything in golden light. I stumbled outside, where my friends were waiting anxiously, worry etched across their faces. They asked where I had gone, and I shared the truth, the story of Alex, the haunting memories, and how in facing them, I found what I had long sought, healing. It wasn't just Alex's spirit that I had unburdened, it was my own. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling lighter as the weight of childhood remorse began to slip away. That night, we gathered at the lakeside again, and as the stars twinkled above us, I shared my story, hoping that others could learn from it. I found a space to share my pain, to let go of the past, and to find redemption not only for Alex but for myself. When I faced my past, I didn't just find memories of shadows and sorrow, I discovered a path to healing, one that I would carry forward as a guiding light. Sometimes those invisible chains bind us tightly, but it takes a spark of courage to break free. Now, I'm on a journey to speak out about the experiences we bury, to honor those like Alex lost to our neglect and indifference. I found solace not just for myself but also the courage to face the past and gift others the chance to heal. All it took was one night, one forgotten house, and a long overdue apology to the boy who had been waiting all along. When I tried to mediate a conflict and it backfired, I never expected it would lead to a nightmarish experience that would change my life forever. It all started innocently enough at work. My coworkers, Jane and Rick, had been bickering for weeks over office supplies, a trivial thing now, but at the time, it felt urgent. They both came to me separately the day before, complaining about each other. Jane claimed Rick was hoarding the printer paper, while Rick insisted that Jane was wasting the ink. I was just the unofficial peacemaker, trying to bring some harmony to our cramped office. So, I thought, why not just mediate a meeting? I scheduled it during lunch in the break room. I arrived early, hoping to prepare the atmosphere, maybe arrange some snacks or put on a soothing playlist. When Jane walked in, her expression was stern, eyebrows knitted together like a defiant little hedgehog. She didn't sit immediately, just hovered by the door, sipping the last of her coffee. "Where's Rick?" she snapped after a few minutes of silence. I assured her he was on his way. Just then, Rick entered, his usual swagger slightly shaky as he spotted Jane. I waved them both to sit, putting on my best let's get this sorted face. I opened with some light-hearted remarks about how debating over paper might rival the office Olympics. But neither of them laughed. Instead, the tension in the room tightened like a noose. The discussion started clumsily, both of them firing off accusations and claims that had no room for compromise. After a few minutes, I cut in, trying to steer the conversation. They each shared their side, and I reframed their words, hoping to find common ground. Just as I began to feel optimistic, everything went south. They both pointed fingers at me, accusing me of taking sides. "You don't get it. You're just as bad as the others. This is between us," Jane shouted, and I could see the fire in her eyes. Each passing second felt heavier until I suggested they each write down their grievances anonymously. I figured people find it easier to express their frustrations when they do it in writing without the pressure of confrontation. I collected the scraps of paper they'd scrawled their concerns on and read them out loud, wanting them to see how silly their arguments were when distilled to their essence. But as I began reading, my heart dropped into my stomach. The complaints turned from office supplies to accusations I never anticipated. They weren't just petty grievances, dark undertones wove through the words. "Rick leaves the air conditioner running all night and steals my food from the fridge," Jane said. Rick's paper shriveled in my hands, I could see him tense at each revelation. Jane sabotaged my last presentation out of jealousy. I read one detail aloud, and the break room fell silent, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're in a coffin. Suddenly, I realized these grievances were layered, rooted in bitter jealousy that transcended office supplies. Things took an even sharper turn when I read the final note. It was in Rick's scrawled handwriting, "I'll make her regret ever coming for me." That sent a shudder down my spine. The air in the room shifted, as if something unseen was sliding in, a presence I couldn't define. I looked at their faces, and they were both pale, reflecting my own fright. I could almost feel the walls closing in. A pulse of anger erupted in Rick. "How dare you bring that up? You can't do that," he yelled, fury twisting his features. Jane retaliated, accusation spilling from her lips like venom. I felt like a marionette whose strings had been severed. Without thinking, I blurted, "What's the worst that could happen?" A question I instantly regretted, for it felt like I had opened Pandora's box. Silence engulfed us again, thick and suffocating, until suddenly, there was a knock. The break room door swung open to reveal a shadowy figure. My heart raced. The figure stepped into the light, and I recognized him as the janitor, Mr. Graves. His presence brought a chill, like an unwelcome breeze in a too small space. He had this way of moving through the office quietly, always glancing at people with this knowing expression, as if he understood things we didn't. And now, he was here, staring at us with this unnerving intensity. "You're meddling in things beyond your understanding," he rasped, his voice like gravel. The room shifted, and Jane and Rick froze, their argument forgotten. "You think you can fix this? Some things were never meant to be fixed." I wanted to protest, to tell him not to eavesdrop or make assumptions, but the words caught in my throat. Whatever divide had been formed during a simple office squabble seemed to deepen, twisting the air into something charged and dangerous. Mr. Graves took a step closer, his form darkening the threshold, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. "You stir the pot, invite chaos, and it may just consume you," he said, eyes glinting with a corner of something almost feral. Something flicked behind him, a shadow stretching unnaturally, and I couldn't look away. The very atmosphere felt palpable, thick with unvoiced threats as if the walls themselves were listening. In that moment, I wanted to run. I wanted to slam the door behind me and distance myself from everything that was happening. But I also felt an inexplicable urge to hold my ground. A wave of defiance washed over me. I shot back, "We can handle our issues. We just need to talk." As soon as I said it, I regretted those words. Rick and Jane seemed to share a look, a wild, unhinged moment passing between them. I knew I had just poured gasoline on smoldering embers. Panic struck as they both lunged for the scraps of paper, snatching them from my hands like hungry wolves. "You think this is a joke?" Rick seethed, his green eyes flashing with madness. He tore the paper into shreds, flinging them into the air as Jane shrieked, their voices weaving a chaotic chorus that echoed off the break room walls. Just then, Mr. Graves leaned back against the wall, an ominous smirk creeping onto his face. "And that's how it begins," he murmured, a whisper that clawed at my spine. The shadows in the room deepened, the air thick with an unsettling tension. He turned, slowly moving away from the door as if he were a predator stalking its prey. "Be careful what stains you leave in the well of your enemies," he advised, disappearing into the hallway, a phantom at the precise moment my stomach twisted with dread. There I stood, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Jane and Rick were still caught in their whirlwind of raw emotion, but something told me we hadn't just crossed a petty line, crossed over to a place I couldn't quite grasp. Whatever I had tried to fix had devolved into madness, and I suddenly felt like a paper boat adrift in an unrelenting storm. As they erupted into another argument, I felt it, the room, the shadows, the chaos, it was all turning against us. I backed away, my heart pounding, the conflict no longer contained in paper. It had festered, evolved, and now hovered like a dark gas in the air, chilling everything it touched. I grabbed the doorknob, freshly set on escape, ready to leave the maelstrom of my own making. Whatever Mr. Graves had warned me of, I knew this wasn't going to end well. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd set something awful into motion, not just in the break room, but in a much wider world beyond those four walls. I fled, leaving the storm of rage behind me, but as I hurried down the corridor, I could swear I heard their voices rising again, angrier, sharper, weaving together into something unrecognizable. And in that moment, I realized mediation wasn't just about words or intentions, it was a dance with darkness, a dangerous game that could backfire in unexpected, dreadful ways. I tried to bring two people together, to mend their conflict, but now I had unintentionally sown discord among them, possibly inviting something sinister into our lives. If you find yourself in a similar situation, heed my warning, never meddle without knowing exactly what lay beneath the surface. Sometimes it's best to leave certain conflicts unresolved, for you may awaken something that won't rest until it is satisfied. The time I made a mistake and learned from it starts with me reflecting on a regret, one I've carried for years, but I've never shared it because it sounds insane, like something out of a horror film. But I feel compelled to get it off my chest now, especially since Halloween is around the corner, and I know I can't keep it bottled up any longer. It all started about 5 years ago when I was an anxious sophomore in college, dealing with the usual pressures of exams, relationships, and a desperate need to fit in. I wasn't exactly popular, but there was this one social event that seemed promising, a mysterious gathering in the woods that people whispered about. Imagine a bonfire in a secluded part of the forest, candles in paper bags outlining pathways, and flickering lights reflected off the leaves. It was supposed to be a night of revelations and connections, but deep down, I was terrified of what might actually happen, should I take that leap and step into the unknown. Nonetheless, curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself following a group of friends to the woods that fateful Friday night. The air was electric, charged with the thrill of untold secrets and laughter echoing around us. As we arrived, I was hit by the smell of smoke and the warmth of the crackling fire. People were engaged in deep conversations, and an unspoken bond pulsed through the night. I was told by my friend Sarah to look out for something called the offering. Apparently, it was some bizarre tradition where attendees would write their biggest fears on pieces of paper and toss them into a fire to, supposedly, cleanse themselves. Entering into the circle, I hesitated, mind racing with my own fears. I had issues, battles with anxiety, overwhelming pressure to succeed, and failing friendships. But I pushed the voice of doubt out of my head and found a scrap of paper in my pocket, scribbling my deepest fear with shaky hands. I tossed the paper into the fire as instructed, watching it curl and ignite, feeling an odd sense of relief wash over me, as if maybe releasing it would set me free. It felt comforting yet oddly unsettling. The night continued, spirits were high, and I met some cool people. A guy named Jake had a whole aura around him, charismatic and a bit mysterious, easily the kind of person who'd be the protagonist in one of those teen dramas. We chatted, laughed, and felt this undeniable chemistry. We even danced, albeit awkwardly, under the moonlight, and everything felt perfect for a moment. Things took a turn, though, when I stumbled upon a makeshift altar at the edge of the bonfire area. Candles flickered ominously amidst strange symbols sprawled across a piece of worn-down wood. In admission, my curiosity got the better of me again, and I approached it, noticing a tiny box nestled between two candles. Unmarked and old, it almost felt like it was calling out to me. In my impulsive nature, I reached for it, ignoring the whispered warnings of my friends. Laughter faded into the background as I opened the box and found a small mirror inside. The moment I looked at my reflection, everything around me shifted, the fire flickered out, shadows danced, and suddenly I wasn't just seeing my own reflection. I swear something stared back at me, an echo of darker me, someone with a twisted smirk, eyes glimmering with malice. Shock and fear took hold of me as I stumbled back, and in my panic, I knocked over one of the candles. It fell, and the flames licked dangerously close to the makeshift altar. People screamed and rushed to grab buckets of water to douse the flames while I held up the mirror, paralyzed by both fear and confusion. From that point on, everything spiraled. I could feel heat rising, and foreboding thoughts chased me like ghosts. It was as if something I had unleashed stirred beneath the surface. I hesitated too long, and when I finally let go of the mirror and tossed it aside, dark tendrils emerged from the shadows surrounding me. It's hard to describe, they twisted in unnatural ways, snatching poor Sarah, who had come to check on me. I could hear her scream, and it echoed in my head long after. The flames roared back to life as chaos ensued, and everyone rushed to escape the remnants of something unholy we had awakened. I stumbled back toward the bonfire, caught between horror and regret. The night ended with our group scattered, and I finally recalled one of those elder warnings about the woods, rumors of spirits, of those who had come too close and stayed too long. They became part of the forest, forever lost. I knew I had made a grave mistake. In the aftermath, I couldn't shake the feeling of accountability. My reckless curiosity led to something darker. The guilt consumed me, like a parasite burrowing deeper with each passing day. I never spoke to my friends again, convinced they'd blame me for what happened. The whispers and stares from classmates made it worse. I became a ghost in the halls of my own college, burdened with fear and a heavy conscience. To this day, I struggle to forgive myself. Months felt like years, and then one night, I decided to face my fears. I returned to the forest, the place where it all began, alone. It was eerie, that same unmistakable energy thrumming through the air. But at the heart of it, maybe I hoped to find some semblance of closure. I brought a new paper and a pen, and I found my way back to that spot. The bonfire was long gone, but the circle was faintly etched into the ground, as if the past was still lingering there. I shot my fears out into the darkness once more, knowing full well that this time, they wouldn't consume me. I learned that mistake makes us human, but the aftermath can either strengthen us or break us. And as I stood there, I felt a flicker of hope. As crazy as it sounds, I think I even heard a faint whisper of forgiveness trailing off with the wind. So if you find yourself at a gathering that tempts the unknown, remember this: curiosity can unlock doors better left shut. You can learn from your mistakes, but some shadows might haunt you forever. Whatever choices you make, carry your fears with openness, for they are but a reflection. You'll find strength if you dare face what lies beneath. Please, don't make the mistakes I did. Let my tale serve as a warning, a reminder to tread carefully in realms where darkness lurks and curiosity can ignite something you may never recover from.